Education outcomes in New South Wales, which essentially is an update at the beginning of the school year 2023 on the work that we did last year. And I welcome the committee members to Camden and our first guest, Angelo Gavrieliatos, and I also commence with the custom of the Parliament to acknowledge the traditional inhabitants of the land, in this case the Darawal people, and I do that with all due respect. I also acknowledge other important contributors to the history of our Parliament, including those who built the building, very often working in a dangerous industry, and our parliamentary staff, particularly our committee staff here today, who supported MPs and made our work and representative role possible. We acknowledge and thank them all. Today the committee will be hearing from representatives of the Teachers Federation, the IEU and the Secondary Principals Council. We'll also hear from several parents from this district. Before we commence, I'd like to make some brief comments about the procedure for today's hearing. Today's hearing is being broadcast live on the Parliament's website. A transcript will be available in the usual fashion. In accordance with the broadcasting guidelines, the House has authorised the filming, broadcasting and photography of committee proceedings by representatives of media organisations from any position in the room and by any member of the public from any position in the audience. Any person filming or photographing proceedings must take responsibility for the proper use of that material. This is detailed in the broadcasting resolution, a copy of which is available from the Secretariat. While parliamentary privilege applies to witnesses giving evidence today, it does not apply to what witnesses say outside of their evidence at the hearing. I therefore urge witnesses to be careful about the comments you may make to the media or others after you complete your time at the hearing. Committee hearings are not intended to provide a forum for people to make adverse reflection on others, and we have a procedural fairness resolution of our House adopted in 2018. Due to the short time frame for this inquiry, there's insufficient time for the usual questions on notice process. However, the committee has resolved that witnesses can provide transcript corrections, clarifications to evidence and additional information within 24 hours of their receipt of the Hansard transcript. If witnesses wish to hand up documents, they should do so through the committee staff. In terms of the audibility today, I remind both committee members and witnesses to speak into their microphones, and if everyone could turn off their mobile phones, including the chair, that would be helpful for the duration of the hearing. I now welcome our first witness, Angelo from the Teachers Federation, and I'd ask you to take the oath or affirmation with the material that's being presented in front of you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And having been sworn in, we can ask, have you got an opening statement that you'd like to make, please?
Yes, I do. Thanks, Chair. Before I do so, can I please acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. By way of some opening remarks, I'd just like to start off with a quote that guides me and I hope would guide many people, and it certainly does guide many education policymakers around the world. And it's a quote by an internationally acclaimed, highly esteemed academic researcher, Professor Linda Darling-Hammond. Professor Linda Darling-Hammond said that if you don't have a strong supply of well-prepared teachers, nothing else in education can work. And here we are in the state of New South Wales without a strong supply of well-prepared teachers. In fact, in the middle, I hope it's the middle, because that might suggest that we might get out of it. But here we are in New South Wales experiencing the worst teacher shortage in living memory, a teacher shortage that has been brought to us courtesy of 10 years at least failed policies by the coalition government. In your report in November, on page 28, you said that failure to act decisively now, at a point where we are clearly experiencing acute teacher shortages across the state, will harm both current and future generations and their academic outcomes. It pains me to report to the committee that since your report, the situation has worsened in New South Wales. The teacher shortage has gone from bad to worse. the teacher shortage has deepened, impacting students, thousands of students daily, impacting teachers daily. The last available public data is the public data that was tabled in Parliament in November. And that publicly available data shows that the vacancies across New South Wales were in the order of 3,300 vacancies. That's triple, in fact more than triple the number of vacancies of 2021 when the government announced its much heralded and often cited teacher supply strategy, the $125 million teacher supply strategy. At that time, there were 995 or thereabouts, and excuse me if I'm off by a digit or two. 995 vacancies in 2021 when they announced the teacher supply strategy, $125 million. Well, based on the latest available data, I can report to the committee that that strategy, that often cited, much heralded strategy, has delivered 3 people from overseas and 5 mid-career changes, one of whom has already left. It is a failure. But you see, this failure is not only a failure in academic sense, it's a failure in delivery of education, which for me is the most important contribution a government can make in terms of nation building. Our kids are missing out, our teachers are burning out. We've also reached the point, never reached before in our history, where now resignation rates have outstripped retirement rates, and where the exit of early career teachers is at a 13-year high. The causes of this shortage are well known, they're well documented, and clearly have been before the government by way of internal briefings for years. Internal briefings have told the government of the severity of the crisis. Internal briefings have told the government of the cause of the crisis. Unsustainable, crippling workloads, uncompetitive salaries which continue to decline relative to other professions, and we're talking about a tight labour market where there's certain labour market realities. Professor John Buchanan today released another report saying that teacher salaries have further declined since his last report of 2020. And of course, insecure work, which increased by 83% during the life of this government. 83% increase of insecure work. More than 70%, close to 80% of all new graduates engaged in insecure work temporary contracts, and according to their own research and evidence, knowing that insecure work increases, quote unquote, the likelihood of teachers leaving for more permanent work. I repeat, Mr. Chair, when you know the cause of a problem, you know the solution. What we've had from this government is repeated examples of the triumph of spin over substance, and the losers are our kids. Their education is being compromised, their learning is being denied, their futures are being compromised. Thousands of kids last year, on a daily basis, being denied their learning because of the teacher shortage, put in playgrounds, minimally supervised in halls and libraries, and on top of that, the department denying you information that you asked for in an attempt to suppress, not only manipulate, but manipulate and suppress the data that goes to that matter. Out of area teaching, which continues because of the shortage. Impacting kids. Their own, and this is referenced of course in our submission of July last year, but their own internal evidence shows, and I know it's not profound, but their own internal evidence shows, surprise, surprise, that kids who are taught by fully qualified, appropriately qualified teachers, guess what? Their HSC results are better than those who aren't. It's in their reports. Kids are being denied opportunities and their futures. Around the state, I've been receiving reports. Last year, for a month, I was on travelling the state, and I was receiving reports, and I continue to receive reports of high schools collapsing classes, reducing subject choice to create internal buffers because of the shortage and not being able to get the teachers that they need. And in high schools and primary schools, kids that need additional support more than others are being denied specialist support through EALD teachers or support teachers and the like, who are being redirected and deployed to fill gaps because of shortages. This is a crisis. One of the burdens of having been around for a long time is that you can reference these things across a long period of history. And I put it to you that in my time, there has never been a crisis, nor have I read of a documented crisis, the depth of which and breadth of which we're experiencing now. I used some words from your own report where you rightly said, failure to act decisively now.
Thank you.
Here we are in 2022.
Thank you. And now we can move to questions starting with the Labor opposition.
Thanks very much, Mr Chair. Thank you very much, Mr Gavrilatos, for the impassioned opening statement.
I wasn't impassioned, I was contained.
We share your passion for our kids and wanting them to get the best start in life, and we certainly understand the pressure that teachers are under. We did do a very detailed and in-depth inquiry last year which showed the state of the teacher shortages and the impact that was having on students. Our kids, well, most kids return to school this week, particularly at public schools, but teachers would have been back for some time now. Do you feel that the crisis or the shortages that we talked about last year have gotten better, or that they have gotten worse?
Well, I can only respond on publicly available data. And I've cited the publicly available data as it was tabled in Parliament in November last year, and it was also been the subject of media reports, I think about a week or two ago, which provided not only the global figure of 3,300, but the vacancies by way of departments, operational directorates, showing that of those vacancies, 55% were in regional and rural areas, which speak to the fact that they're impacted often first and most acutely. But here's the difference with respect to the crisis and where we find ourselves. It's statewide. When I say it's from Bondi to Broken Hill, that's not just, trying to be literate or clever. When Northern Beaches reports vacancies in a high school of 10 vacancies, across the state, the depth of the crisis, it's deepening and it's broadening. So, and as I said, I've received countless reports of schools collapsing classes and reducing subject choice because of the shortage and in an attempt to create inbuilt buffer. That's denying kids their opportunities. Opportunities should be there. We should not be in this crisis because the briefings that were available to the government 3 and 4 and 5 years ago were not acted on. That's why we're in this crisis. We will run out of teachers in 5 years, said one internal briefing in 2018, 2019. Well, here we are. As I said earlier, we've now reached the point where resignation rates have outstripped retirement rates. The exit rate of early career teachers is at a 13-year high, and initial teacher education, well, the numbers are off the cliff. A 30% reduction in those enrolling in initial teacher education and only 50% completion rates. We know the cause of all this, but this government, it's a case of anything but dealing with the cause and admitting that the policy settings have brought us here.
And I appreciate you referring to the publicly available data. Obviously, we've had a summer school holidays break. I would appreciate this is only anecdotal evidence, but from your conversations with teachers who have returned to the classroom, have they seen any dramatic changes that have happened over summer?
Look, in all fairness, it's the fourth day of the school year. These reports will start coming in, but I've already received reports of, as I said earlier, collapsed classes and the like. in terms of timetabling. I think we'll see more. Regrettably, I get no joy out of this. None at all.
Yeah.
Where are those collapsed classes in particular?
High schools. So what they do, see, the
I
short...
don't know what they do, but whereabouts? What sort of schools? What sort of...
All across the state.
Right.
Across the state. So what happens is, and the point is, it's not only... Quite often the commentary is that the shortage is in maths and science and STEM. It's across the board, and the data that we presented last year shows it's English, maths, science, history, geography and the like. So what you do in a school when you construct a timetable, for example, rather than run 6 English classes, you'll run 5, increase the class size of all of them to create buffer. Now when you do that, you're denying the opportunities of kids in terms of teachers being able to provide more attention to kids in the process. And you create that buffer because of the shortages and to build in relief that doesn't exist.
Right. Are you aware of any directive that's gone out from the Education Department about ways in which schools can mask the nature and impact of these teacher shortages and not inform parents of the true situation that schools...
I think I spoke to that when we last met, the last time I appeared before the committee. There was a request, I think it was a question on notice or a request from this committee or some level of government asking for figures of the total instances of minimal supervision, collapsed classes, etc. And what happened as a result of that request, when the department started receiving numbers that were clearly embarrassing, the department then issued advice or instructions to schools' principals to recalibrate, to mask the figures by offering new interpretations of what constitutes minimal supervision. For example, what they said is that if there are 4 classes in a playground or a school hall, that's not 4 instances of minimal supervision. That's 1. But then what happened was they didn't even provide you with the advice saying in estimates, having watched some of it, saying in estimates that they can't provide the advice because it's inaccurate and they don't hold accurate advice.
Are you aware of that advice being renewed for this school year, that it's gone out again to give schools ways to mask the true impact?
I'm not aware of that.
Parents what's happened, that they're better off collapsing classes and, as you say, one minimal count rather than leaving any students unattended.
I'm not aware of any such advice, directive or direct or otherwise, since that time.
Right. Thanks, Todd.
I just got one more question, Mr. Gavriladis, before I pass back to my colleagues, which is just, you talked about resignations outstripping retirements. This isn't a demographic problem that, to be honest, most of us would be aware of. Our teachers are ageing. This is actually new teachers and trained teachers mid-career actually choosing to leave the teaching
So this is what makes it even more serious. Even if they wanted to engage in sophisticated workforce planning, which they haven't for a long time, you can engage in it's much easier to engage in workforce planning based on retirements. There's a kind of stability there in numbers. But when your resignations outstrip retirements, well, then it makes the workforce planning even harder because, as you said, it's not demographic. It cuts across, and then when you couple that with the other statistic of exit rates at a 13-year high for early career teachers, you've got a major, major, major problem.
Thanks very much, Mr. Gavriladis.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Gavriladis. So I'd just like to ask you about the government's proposal around dealing with the question of insecure work. What consultation have they engaged with the Federation in relation to their proposals around converting temporary positions to permanent positions?
Temporary engagements in New South Wales under the life of this government have increased by 83%. I need to say this by way of background. Their own research, the department's own figures, which are publicly available, show that 78% of people entering the workforce entered as temporary engagements in secure work. So that's the context. Only 1% increase in permanent employment, but 80 or thereabouts, and 83% increase in temporary engagements. This is the government's own doing. So I smile, cynically I suppose, but I'll say that we're glad that there is now a bipartisan commitment to convert 10,000, 11,000 temporary engagements to permanent. We're glad that there's bipartisanship. We do note that the Coalition announced its intention to convert those temporary positions to permanent within 12 hours of Chris Minns having announced the policy to convert 10,000 temporary positions to permanent. That's fine. That's fine. We support permanent work. There should never have been such a proliferation. There's always a place for temporary engagements. We do need temporary engagements for those people who are on maternity leave, extended leave and the like. But what's happened has been an excessive use of and inappropriate use of temporary engagement, which impacts on the shortage because, as I said, their own internal data shows that those who are in temporary engagement are more likely to leave seeking permanent employment. We've had a number of meetings with them and we'll continue to meet in order to achieve the most efficient and sound application of such a policy setting.
Can I also ask, inflation's running at 7.8%. The government's offer is, the government's wage proposal that's been implemented is substantially lower than that. What feedback are you getting from teachers about the salaries question and the viability of the teaching profession when we're seeing real wage outcomes?
So you're meaning how do teachers feel about a wage cap that has seen an arbitrary wage cap that has seen their salaries decline dramatically in comparison to other professions, only to be further worsened by the inflationary pressures? Yeah, they're thrilled. They're just thrilled. You know, teachers' salaries, and again, government's own internal briefings, teachers' salaries have declined dramatically in comparison to other professions over the last 30 years, making the profession less attractive. That's labour market economics. In a tight labour market, money matters. Indeed, federal government inquiries, a federal government inquiry commissioned by the previous government, Initial Teacher Education, that looked at the collapse of those enrolling into Initial Teacher Education, found that in terms of their surveys, the primary issue at that point was salaries. Other issues come into play in terms of workload as you progress through careers, but the point of choosing a career, salaries is important. Today, as I said, Professor Buchanan and the team from the University of Sydney Business School released a report that shows that teachers' salaries continue to decline, and the situation, to use the title of the report, is that the salary situation has gone from bad to worse. And not only has it gone from bad to worse in terms of comparison to other professions, but also the inflationary impact, which found that real earnings have declined by 5.7% between 2020 and 2022. So we've got, well, the perfect storm: uncompetitive salaries, crippling workloads, all of which are the underlying factors of the crisis that has been created and will continue unless we have a policy reset.
Thank you. Abigail Boyd.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning to you, Mr. Gabrielatos. I thank you very much for attending again, and it's very upsetting to hear that things have not improved since the last time we spoke. I just wanted to touch on one of the things that you raised in your opening statement in relation to, I think you said that the SLSOs are being deployed to cover teacher shortfalls. Is that correct? Could you talk a bit more about what that looks like?
I didn't say precisely SLSOs. I said other specialist staff. There very well may be instances that SLSOs are providing some forms of supervision. I wouldn't be surprised by that. But my point went to I'll use the word redeployment, or the deployment of specialist staff in our schools, support teachers, EALD teachers, teacher librarians being deployed from their task of providing specialist support for those kids in terms of non-English speaking kids of non-English speaking backgrounds or EALD backgrounds, kids with special needs, having those specialist teachers deployed from those tasks. Because then they're technically, in many instances, they're not assigned a class, they work with groups of kids. So they're not working with those groups of kids to provide cover where other cover cannot be secured. Now that is a serious issue for those kids who need it the most. So that's what I spoke to Ms Boyd.
Thank you. So that is incredibly concerning then, that we have some of the most disadvantaged students being further disadvantaged by the teacher shortages. I just wanted to since the last hearing that we held for this inquiry, we've obviously had the National Teacher Workforce Action Plan released that New South Wales was part of, released in December. We've heard the New South Wales Government announce a plan to halve the study time required for postgrad teacher education from 2 years to 1. Do you think that plan really aligns with point 2 of the national plan to strengthen initial teacher education, or is it going against what they've agreed?
I think it's of grave concern that against the backdrop of a teacher shortage, we're seeing attempts to undermine teacher qualifications and standards. We are very firm with respect to the need to defend qualifications and standards for the profession, but also for those aspiring to enter into the profession. It's interesting and contradictory, is it not, that in one breath, the New South Wales Government, in its submissions to federal inquiries about qualifications and the preparations of teachers, is saying we need to add more units to initial teacher education to better prepare graduating teachers to better deal with the complexities of the contemporary classroom, particularly to better deal with the needs of students students with disabilities, students of EALD, to be better prepared with classroom management, etc. So in the one breath they're saying in their submission, and I think I've quoted verbatim, we need more units, and then all of a sudden they said, but we're going to halve the qualification. They said we need more units and therefore more time to do it, but we're going to halve the qualifications. I think this is it's a very, very dangerous signal here by the government. And I just want to quote, we also know that when graduates are underprepared, it increases the attrition rate once they come into teaching. Preparation or classroom readiness is important. Just to quote Professor Mary Ryan, Dean of Education, we don't want to see graduates enter the profession and leave shortly after due to being underprepared and feeling undersupported in what is complex. So there's always a legitimate debate to be had about initial teacher education, what constitutes sound initial teacher education, but we'll always err on the side of standards and qualifications of aspiring teachers rather than seeing compromising about those standards, including the introduction and ushering in people who are unqualified and certainly underqualified in our schools.
So again, it's this approach, by shortcutting the teacher education, we have a government who is trying to put a band-aid over the teacher shortages issue and actually in the process creating more of a problem or a potential problem in the future. Is that what you're saying? I
would certainly agree with that, but because there's also the other side of this. There's other studies that show that when you lower entry levels into initial teacher education and lower the quals, you're actually lowering the status and you're sending signals, negative signals, to when it comes to recruiting or attracting into initial education young folk, bright young folk who will look elsewhere. It has a negative impact, a negative impact. I think it's a case of the government constantly deflecting from wanting to address the underlying causes, and it's always another case of another announcement, look over here, look over there, and rather than deal with the issues.
So it's kind of that negative feedback loop then, is what they're creating. Can I just ask one last question before I hand over to the chair? The issue of pay, and we talked a lot about the value of pay in terms of elevating the public perception of teachers, and as well as obviously adequately rewarding teachers for the incredible job that they do. Do you think that the government's plan to sort of have some teachers on a higher salary than others is addressing that perception, or do you think it actually serves to divide public perception of teachers, that some of them are worthy of this higher amount and some aren't? What's your sort of views on that pay idea?
We need a competitive salary across the board to attract and retain the teachers we need. We need to compensate teachers for the role they play in society and executing the functions that we expect of them. There are already differential rates of pay within our scales, including additional pay to recognise further qualification, skills and training and demonstrated qualification. That already exists. What we're getting from the government, and we got from the government last year, was another attempt to deflect attention from failing to act on the fundamentals to recruit and retain the teachers we need. This is not about an exercise that may or may not impact 5% of teachers. This is about securing the teachers we need when the government itself said that by next year or the year after, we're going to need an extra 3,800 teachers. And that was before the new data that showed the exodus of teachers, early career teachers, and resignation rates. We've got to deal with the fundamentals, not sideshows.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ms Boyd. Could I please ask, just coming back to that question of the collapsed classes, which you said are across the state, can you provide the committee with a couple of examples? For instance, the worst one that we've heard for the beginning of this school year?
No, I can't for the beginning. We will be collecting data as soon as we possibly can. Yesterday was the first day that kids went back in our public school, or started going back in our public schools. There is no doubt that the data will start coming into us by our reps in a very next little while, but it's not. I do not have current data as of this year.
Right. Okay. And
I'm reporting on the data, the publicly available data, and other data as of last year.
Yep. Just noting that this inquiry is not just about teacher shortages, also education outcomes. I saw the Federation, through your good self, backing in Labor's latest funding deal for schools. In terms of education outcomes, many people raise with me, and I think it's a burning question for this committee, why is it over the last 20 years we've had the fastest falling school academic results in the world, according to Jeff Masters, the curriculum reviewer, but at the same time we've got the highest level of school funding we've ever had because of the Gonski pipeline? How do those two things match?
Well, let's unpack that. There has been an increase in funding in education in the last 10 years, but the greatest increases of funding in the last 10 years have gone where it's needed least, to the non-government school, Catholic and independent schools. The data speaks to that. The greatest increase in the last 10 years. Non-government schools, all of them, are funded at above what we call the minimum level of funding, the schooling resource standard, which is the standard agreed to by all ministers as the minimum level of funding. Non-government schools aggregated are funded at 105% or thereabouts of their schooling resource standard. Our public schools in New South Wales are funded at about 88% of the minimum level of funding. The government will say it's 92% because they throw in an extra 4% of stuff that's not school related, e.g. capital depreciation and the like, only impacting public schools. So our public schools remain underfunded. The additional funding in terms of getting our public schools to 100% of the minimum level of funding they're entitled to, it's not an aspirational figure, that's what the governments consider the minimum level of funding, is to be targeted, must be targeted for the schools that need it the most, serving our most disadvantaged kids, recognising there is no level playing field. We've got to invest in those kids to give them the best chance to succeed.
Right, but you're acknowledging there has been an increase in funding for government schools.
There has been minuscule in comparison.
But how do you explain the breaking of that nexus, that long-suffering taxpayer would expect more funding for schools would mean better results?
Because it's not been adequate to be able to target the kids in the way that we need to target it. It's also been during the same era where we've had failed department and government policies of local schools, local decisions, which have been allowed for the focus of the funding to be able to deliver, because also we had the funding monetised, governments and departments washing their hands, and schools left with money that they can't allocate because they can't find teachers. So the school budgets show in some instances, and I think you had a whack at me about that, the school budgets show there are instances where school budgets have got money in there, because that's schools that can't find the teachers because of the teacher shortage and other related matters.
Well, I've been to many disadvantaged schools and spoken to principals about their funding allocation, and almost universally they'll say we've got enough money. In some cases they say we've got so much money they don't know how to spend it. I'll give you two examples. Ashcroft High School has converted what used to be a staff room into equivalent of a community health unit with wellbeing counsellors, speech, hearing experts, speech pathologists. That's how much money they've got. And at Warwick Farm Public School, they're funding a program where parents are bussed off to Ingleburn, fair distance, to be a better parent courses, I think under the coverage of the University of New South Wales. So this Gonski money out on the ground, like rivers of gold. And when you find schools, a significant number of them, that have got so much money, they don't know how to spend it on core educational objectives. What is the explanation for why this nexus has been broken between increased funding under Gonski and improved education outcomes?
So it's interesting that this discussion doesn't occur in the context of private schools being funded at 105%.
Well, I visited private schools. They also say they've got enough money. You know, when I visit a school, Angelo, that tells me that there's a paucity of funding, I'll let you know. But for 4 years, I visited a hell of a lot of schools, notwithstanding the COVID lockdowns, and this is what we're finding.
We've obviously visited different schools.
Okay, where are the schools you visited where they say they haven't got enough money?
I've not been to any school where they've said they've got enough money. I've not been to any school where they say...
You mustn't be asking.
I won't resolve, and we won't resolve from the fact that our schools and continue to pursue the policy objective of our schools being funded at their minimum level. And that's 100% of the SRS, which governments consider is the minimum amount required. Beyond that, what needs to be had is a discussion, and government leading this, about making sure that money is being invested where it matters most so that kids can achieve their very best. And the first thing we need to do as part of that is ensure that there's a qualified teacher in front of every classroom every day.
Yep. One thing Labor has got right is the ban on mobile phones in high schools. What do your members say about this? My feedback close to home and elsewhere is that these mobile phones are a distraction. There's no evidence they provide any useful educational input in the school. They help to facilitate bullying. When the teachers turn the other way, they're all, you know, some of these kids sadly are addicted to these things. Politicians are bad enough, the kids are worse.
I was going to say.
So what's the feedback that you get from...
Oh, look, there's no doubt that they are a distraction. But unfortunately, they're not the only distraction, because you've also got tablets. You've also tablets.
Well,
you've also got
similar devices.
So they are a distraction. They are a distraction, and many schools are approaching it in different manners and in age-specific matters. What you do in a primary school might be different in a high school. There's certainly a distraction. That's what our members say to us. There's a wide variety of views. Those who believe you ban them, those who believe there's a policy of put them in your bag, you don't take them out. But either way, there's got to be some restrictions. We need restrictions, and restrictions are important to ensure that kids aren't distracted from lessons. So there are legitimate times in a lesson when you might want kids to go to their tablet or their laptop, etc. But other than those times, they are a distraction.
Yeah, but the mobile phones, isn't the best practice that they go
put them in your bag, put them in your bag, put them in your bag, lock or put them in your bag.
They're technically at the school. If
put them in your bag.
An emergency phone call needs to be made.
My view is put them in your bag.
Put them in the bag, and that's a Federation policy.
We don't have specific policy on that matter. We've got policy on a lot of things, but I'm offering you my view on that.
Okay, thank you. And just on this question of teacher workload, you cited earlier on our report in November, and the evidence we took, I suppose, was conflicting about the question of teacher workload, because it seemed that some of the workload that was spoken of was actually integral to the job of teaching, such as marking tests and assessments, recording student data and learning plans, and ordering classroom materials and the like. What specifically is the workload paperwork item that the Federation would like to see abolished?
So what we need to do is go through and undertake... Look, this is a problem with some of these things. Some of these things need to happen, but the questions need to be asked, is it teachers that need to be doing all of these things? There needs to be a thorough audit of all of this stuff, but not only some of that admin stuff, but the compliance stuff. Each year teachers have to spend a lot of time on compliance matters, and only last week I received the full spread of it. I'll share it with the committee, what was sent to me, the full list of all the compliance things that have to be undertaken. You know, this has to be done yearly. Now, some of this stuff I don't understand why it needs to be done yearly, this compliance stuff. And then there's the admin stuff, the added admin stuff that we've got to look at. Well, what is it that teachers should not be doing?
Haven't schools got admin staff to do admin?
Well, they do, but clearly all of this has been put on the plate of teachers to do, because admin staff have continued to do what they did, and no doubt a lot more has been added to them in terms of data entry and compliance and the like. I think it's out of control. I think new technologies have resulted in some of this stuff getting out of control, and I think it's high time for an even deeper investigation about the impact of these new technologies and how they're impacting on teachers. One of the things in terms of new technologies and impact on teachers is that teachers are now constantly are in receipt of emails, even text messages from parents and the like, and we're living in a society where there's a fair bit of immediate instant gratification kind of stuff happening, wanting real-time answers. Maybe it's time for us to look at what's happening in other jurisdictions and other countries about the right to disconnect and the like when it comes to some of these things outside hours of work.
I was jumping on that question around data. I think there was an announcement last year from the government about putting in place a trial for support staff to do data entry for teachers. Has that happened, or what's the sort of...
Look, I can't give you the latest. It's just another announcement. You know, there may be one or two, three people in trialling this, that and the other. What we've seen, as I said, is triumph of spin over substance, and no shortage of announcements aimed at deflecting attention from some serious matters.
Scott Farlow?
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Gabrielatos. Just to pick up on that mobile phone point, you talked about the diversity of views amongst your members when it comes to that. With something like that, is it something that's perhaps best left at the local position where the school principal can determine a position when it comes to mobile phones?
I think it never hurts for the government to have policy positions. Sometimes policy positions can be broad frameworks, sometimes they can be quite prescriptive. I don't think government's that prescriptive, as I said, at different times. But no doubt there's always views expressed. And as I said, there's always an age appropriateness to this stuff as well.
As you were saying, differences between primary schools and high schools and
Of
senior
course
high
there
school and the
are.
like.
Of course there are.
Just also interested in going through and picking out some of the CC data in terms of the class numbers, particularly for K to 6.
Yeah.
We've seen since 2011 a reduction in general, and even between 2021 to 2022 a reduction in the number of students per class sizes. How does that work in terms of the number of enrolments and the teacher supply shortage we're seeing? Why are we seeing that reduction in students per classes still?
Because the additional funding made available to schools is allocated in a way that schools consider to be appropriate and effective in addressing educational learning and outcomes for kids. And where the funding is located to allow for more small group tuition, for example, or a slight reduction in class sizes, they're not dramatic reduction in class sizes, they're sound decisions aimed at improving the learning outcomes of kids. I don't think you're suggesting that we increase our class sizes in order to...
Yeah, I'm just wondering how you square that circle in a sense as to how we've got this teacher supply issue, but we're still seeing the number.
But doesn't that go down to workforce planning? Doesn't that go down in workforce planning and in knowing full well in advance what your needs are going to be? When the government was in receipt of data in 2018 and 2019 with graphs showing what the supply gap would be Why wasn't the government acting to put in place the policy settings to address that supply gap? One of the data, the graphs show a projection of the supply gap showing a potential shortage by the end of this year of 2,425. Well, guess what? We've exceeded it.
Which graph is this, or which?
There's thousands of pages of internal briefings that have been provided to the government over the last number of years as a result of an SO 52. It's all available there. It's all on the desk of the minister and other elements of the government. It's all there. See, this is what annoys me. The government had thousands of pages. I know members of this committee have seen those thousands of pages, all of which were alerting the government and warning the government. When you got a briefing that had the heading, "We will run out of teachers in 5 years," I'm not making this up, it's in the briefing, and you ignore it, or you try to justify after it's been made public, "Oh yes, but the circumstances have changed." Too right, they've changed, they've become worse. And when the same briefing underscores and highlights the reasons for it, the excessive workload placed on teachers and uncompetitive salaries are acting as a disincentive when it comes to attracting and recruiting and retaining people. That's in the brief. They're not my words. It's very frustrating when I'm responding to you as a member of government with verbatim from the briefings that are before the government. But anyway, so that's the way it is.
And Mr Gabrielatos, just picking up on some of the points you've raised before about some of the publicly available data, we've of course got the department with us tomorrow to answer some questions there. What are some of the things that you would like to see in terms of that updated public available data? You've talked about some of the figures you've got from last year. What would you like to see updates on? What are some of the things we should be asking?
I think we need data. We're always mindful of these call for papers and SO52s.
Yeah, just give us 3 examples.
I will, but I'm just saying we're mindful because that always falls back on our teachers and on our principals who have to supply this. But, you know, transparency is a very important thing when it comes to public policy. What we need to know is an update on the figures available to us in terms of vacancies across the state. The figures by way of subject areas would be important as well, and projections related thereto.
It's a good list of 3, yep.
Huh?
That's a good list of 3.
There you go.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Ms McDonald.
I don't have any questions.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Ms Boyd, on WebEx? The opposition? We're on time, but...
Can I just have one final question?
Yeah.
Have I been briefed, Chair? Have I in my responses that efficient?
You've exceeded expectations.
One of the things that came out of our previous inquiry was that there's probably a difference in the way, just coming back to this question about data and admin workload, there seems to actually be a difference in the way that parts of the department are actually considering the need to upload information to NESA in relation to things like programming and accreditation, and whereas some in the independent sector are taking a slightly more minimalistic approach. Are you aware of any of those kinds of challenges? That was certainly just something that came out from our discussions.
I don't feel I can respond to that question. I'd have to take that on notice and get some more info on that. There's always a question about the about being efficient and avoiding duplication, and always assessing if there are any points where there is duplication. But beyond that principle, I can't give you any further response.
Okay. We're on time, so thanks, Angelo, for your contribution and also your assistance throughout this parliamentary term, and undoubtedly we'll see you in the next one.
And good luck to everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Cheers. Okay, and now we can invite forward Veronica Udall from the New South Wales, she's the New South Wales Branch Assistant Secretary, Independent Education Union. Thanks, Veronica. And you should have in front of you a statement, an oath or an affirmation to swear yourself in, please.
Certainly. Thank you. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And it's available to you to give a short opening statement, an outline for the committee, and then we'll go to questions.
Okay, thank you. My name is Veronica Udall. I am an organiser and Assistant Secretary of the New South Wales ACT branch of the Independent Education Union. Prior to 2018, when I commenced my employment at the IEU, I was a teacher employed in non-government primary schools across Sydney for 34 years. You would be aware that the IEU has attended this session last year, but we welcome the opportunity to remain engaged with the committee, to represent particularly today the interests of our members in the Southwest, obviously facing the same issues in a much broader context across Sydney, in the hope of developing a better shared understanding about the direct correlation between salary and cap and professional pay and the workload intensification that directly correlate with the recruitment and retention issues which underpin the current teacher shortage crisis we're experiencing.
Thank you. We'll start with the Labor opposition.
Thanks very much, Ms Udall, and thanks for that very concise summary of the challenges that we're facing. This isn't a problem that we're just facing in the public school sector. This is something that we're facing right across the government and Catholic and independent school sector, and that's obviously where you would have your members.
Yes.
I'm interested to know, I mean, I literally just on my way here this morning had a conversation with a parent who said in passing they'd got an email saying that they didn't have a religion teacher at their high school at the moment. This was a Sydney Metropolitan Catholic high school. You know, you would think that this is a pretty attractive place to be working. Yeah. Are these teacher shortages, are they being felt across the board in your experience or just in specific areas?
No, absolutely, we can confirm it's, obviously you have a focus today in the Southwest, but we can confirm that it's across the state. In 2020, our members alerted us to the fact that they were feeling teacher shortages in their schools, and we conducted a survey at that time. We were already heavily engaged in the areas where we believed would eventually lead to difficulties with staffing, workload intensification being one, and the slide in comparison when compared with other professions in terms of pay. So we were already engaged in that space, but we did immediately act on information that indicated that this problem was emerging and brought it to the attention of employers and to government agencies wherever the opportunity presented itself. In terms of the Southwest, we are aware currently of senior secondary colleges with severe difficulties staffing for this year. They had these problems at the end of last year. We also have primary schools where there are no casuals available, which obviously has an impact on literacy support and other programs which a primary school would normally run. So it's secondary. I know there's a lot of focus on secondary for good reason, but there is also an impact in primary schools.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that early intervention is so important in primary schools, and if that early intervention, that support isn't being able to be provided, then it just creates a snowballing problem as the years go on. So no, that's really helpful. I just wanted to ask you, I mean, as we said, it's a problem that's being faced across the board, but in some ways the independent sector is better placed to be able to provide additional benefits or perhaps increase salaries, so they could actually, if they're facing shortages, they could actually be drawing from our public schools. Isn't that the case? It could actually be making the problems worse in the public system? It
would appear that that should be possible, although we have highly regarded, highly resourced North Sydney, North Shore schools, also declaring difficulties with staffing. And of course, the issue in that case is not so much their ability to pay staff, it's the availability of staff to employ. So it's, in that case, does not simply devolve down to an issue of pay. It's about the fact that there is a shortage of people to employ. And in the secondary situation, as we know, schools are currently being forced to employ teachers so that they have someone in front of a class, but that teacher will possibly be teaching out of field, which provides another layer of complexity to the educational outcomes and the way the teacher shortage is impacting on that.
And is that a widespread practice in your experience? This kind of, we call it out of area teaching sometimes, we call it out of subject specialisation, whatever the terminology, is that something that you're seeing happen?
Yes, absolutely. We did reach out over the last few days to schools in this area and received a lot of feedback about out-of-field teaching. Obviously, it's undesirable. Schools would not take that route if they had any alternative. It creates a lot of extra workload for teachers, but obviously it also impacts significantly on student outcomes, and no teacher wants that.
Absolutely. And it creates an added pressure on both the teacher and on the student when they're
Absolutely, because if we're talking about secondary in this instance, it's specialised key learning area curriculum-based instruction. And if you have, as I have examples of teachers trained in PDHPE undertaking studies for history students, clearly whilst they will be getting as much support as possible from their colleagues, it won't be the same level of instruction. And obviously there's a lot of focus on STEM, so the science and technology subjects and English and mathematics. They're not the only subject areas, to our knowledge, that are impacted. We have shortages in other areas as well. History and geography teachers as one example.
One of the things that we heard in our previous inquiry from one of the specialty teachers associations, I can't remember if it was maths or science, was talking about how if you become a science teacher or a maths teacher, you've got a real passion for it. And then that is imbued in your teaching and that's transferred to kids, which then allows them to engage better in the subject matter. That's obviously not happening if your passion is PD Health PE and you're trying to teach history. That there's that disconnect. You would agree?
Yes, I would agree, but I also think there is a lot more to do the delivery of a subject than simply delivering the content. A teacher who's trained as a science teacher will also be trained in I'll use teacher language to describe it as chunking, so breaking the curriculum down into manageable amounts for students to avoid cognitive load, which is in the news a lot at the moment. The cognitive load that students undertake in learning a subject area. So teachers are trained not only to know the content, but how to teach it. It's one of the teaching standards as well. It's an expectation of the Australian Professional Standards for teachers, that they not only know the subject or the content, but know how to teach it. And obviously a teacher who is teaching out of field hasn't had the opportunity to be trained in how to do that, even though they may have an interest in science or history, for example. So it's not desirable no matter how we look at it, unfortunately.
And it's almost certainly going to result in poorer education outcomes for the student.
It's inevitable, and it's one of the contributing factors to high teacher dissatisfaction and difficulties with retention, because teachers, and we have such a large, dedicated, committed and professional workforce that we are struggling to retain, and one of the frustrations revolves around the fact that they're not able to provide the education to the students that they entered the profession to provide.
Absolutely, that's understandable. You said that you'd spoken to schools around the southwest, and that's really helpful. That would be really useful for us if you could just provide us with any feedback. This is obviously a growing part of Sydney. It's an area where lots of families are moving to bring their families here and for a great life in the southwest. But you're hearing that the schools are having trouble actually staffing the schools, is that correct? And
some of the issues that result from that are merged classes. Merged classes are coming up in both secondary and primary. So we're talking about, in primary, most likely classes up to 30. So 2 classes combined with a single teacher, 60 students. I have a reference to a Year 8 merged class situation. In the secondary, it's more likely also to include merged KLAs or key learning areas. So you may not have 2 merged science classes. You may in fact have a mixture of students because there isn't a geography teacher available that day. So we're having that reported to us, that it's not only a combination of classes in the same subject. I hope that would be rare, but it has been reported to us. Also, another issue that emerges because of the combining of classes revolves around early career teachers who may perhaps be in their first or second year of teaching and who normally would not be allocated a senior class, but are more regularly being asked to take classes of senior students when they are at a very inexperienced stage of their career. In terms of primary, if I can keep them also within the story here, for primary teachers, when classes are merged, sometimes schools need to draw on their specialist teachers to take those classes. So we're looking at the special needs or diverse learning teacher going into a classroom for the day, which means that the rest of the students in that school who may qualify under the nationally consistent collection of data for students with disability funding to receive support, but it isn't possible if those teachers need to be in front of a class. Similarly, most schools would be running literacy and numeracy support programs with teachers running those programs, not support staff. They often are also drafted into that work. And I have a report of specialist music teachers, who of course are also more broadly trained teachers. And of course that means that what we would consider the broader aspects of education, perhaps art, PDHP and sport, music, a reduction in the accessibility to those classes because of the need to place those teachers in the general classroom.
So one of the points that Mr. Gabrielatos was speaking about when he appeared previously was talking about the real decline in the number of, or the real increase in the number of early career teachers who are leaving. Mm-hmm. And what we've heard through previous inquiries, really successful schools actually provide those early year teachers with quite a lot of support, and that might mean that they're not teaching a full load. They're receiving mentoring and support in those early years of a career, as you would in any career that's appropriate. Mm-hmm. But given the teacher shortages, it sounds as though that is just increasingly difficult to provide.
Look, I would agree with that. In the largest of the non-government sector, so the Catholic systemic sector, we have agreements which guarantee an amount of release days for early career teachers. They vary across the state in the amount that the particular employer has agreed to provide, but at this stage we are working towards a reduced load, which I believe is what you were sort of referring to, because the problem with providing an amount of release days is that in the case of a teacher shortage, of course, they're often not able to be provided, or they are banked up towards the end of the year, which may not be when they're needed. So whilst that provision of release is helpful and laudable, the practical reality is that it isn't eventuating in many cases that we're aware of. In other parts of the independent sector, we don't have such arrangements, so it depends on the what resources the school has available to provide. That support for early career teachers is absolutely crucial. As we, I'm sure, can all anticipate and understand the issues that an early career teacher has going into a new school without adequate support, particularly this year and next year when we have New South Wales curriculum syllabuses being launched into schools, both in primary and secondary coming up. That will mean that teachers are not only grappling with being new teachers, they will also be trying to come to terms with a new syllabus. In the case of primary, a number of new syllabuses at the same time. So a lot of pressure there on early career teachers. In the past, experienced teachers would have gladly taken on the role of mentoring and in some cases more active supervision. Schools are required to provide accreditation supervisors for provisional and conditional teachers who are working towards proficient. But most schools would have aimed to provide more support than that. However, experienced teachers are struggling with their own workload. In my time as a teacher, I took several prac students and also mentored early career teachers. But I completely understand why the current cohort of experienced teachers struggle to fulfil that role, particularly when they are covering other classes and perhaps teaching out of field and perhaps working day to day with a merged class situation.
That's really helpful, thanks. Did you have some questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to, could you perhaps explain I suppose, the nexus that exists between the salary outcomes in the state system and the salary outcomes that apply in the non-government system, and how the salary outcomes in the state system affect teacher salaries in the...
Yes, certainly. I'm sure the committee is aware that the 2.5% or nearly 3% salary cap applies to government schools. However, there has long been a connection between salaries in the non-government sector, particularly the Catholic systemic sector, which has long had a principle, I guess you would describe it, that teachers in the Catholic sector would not be paid more or before their counterparts in the state system. I'd like to just comment here that I believe that the vast majority of teachers would not want to see a situation in which the state sector were paid less than the non-government sector. That is not the way teachers perceive the profession at all. So whilst we are not in the non-government sector tied to that salary cap, in effect, in practice, the same salary outcomes apply to teachers in Catholic systemic because of that long-standing principle. For the independent sector that are not within the Catholic system, what has been the practice in the past is that they are reluctant to, again, step outside whatever applies to teachers in the government sector. I believe that teachers generally would say that all teachers, there should be parity regardless of where you teach. Teachers are teachers regardless of the sector, and that whatever pay increases or apply should apply across the board. Does that explain what you were...
So effectively the government's policy, the wages policy, has a big bearing on the salary outcomes in the non-government sector.
Absolutely. Over the last 12 years,
Yes.
because the cap has been in place, this is the 12th year. So over the last 12 years, salaries for teachers in the Catholic system have marched in line with whatever was achieved in the government sector.
And so has that been carried forward in terms of the most recent salary outcome for the Teachers Federation with the state government salary outcome?
Yes, in the main, with the exception of one particular employer who has made the decision to increase. The bulk of the Catholic systemic employers have marched along
So that
in
means
step.
teachers in that sector have experienced a real wage cut.
Absolutely.
Right.
Is that your union's policy to tie non-government salaries to this wages cap in the public sector?
Our policy is to try and achieve the best salary outcomes for all teachers. So
Right.
we would
Why
hope that
don't
what
you-
happened. So we don't have a policy, if I can explain it that way, that would say that we align it. That's at the discretion of the employer, because the union does not control salary outcomes.
No, but why don't you negotiate and campaign for the highest possible salary for your members? Isn't that
We
why
absolutely do,
they
Mr.
pay?
Latham. The Hear Our Voice campaign was underpinned by two aspects.
Right.
Lift the salary cap and achieve significant reductions of workload. Also, support staff parity. That's one area where the Catholic systemic employers have not matched the outcomes that support staff in the state sector achieved. And there's a significant lag time there. So support staff in the non-government sector are significantly disadvantaged at the moment. And we have been campaigning long and hard on exactly that.
Wouldn't a lot of your members say that non-government schools are flourishing with enrolments, that's the expansion sector, they get higher results academically, these are by and large very good schools, a lot of them affordable now, breaking the stereotype in Western Sydney, that your members should be paid significantly more than the government school teachers?
I think
If I was working there, that's what I'd be saying, but surely people must say that.
I think teachers have a very clear understanding of the different circumstances that impact on results, that impact on academic outcomes, and that it doesn't always come down to, well, it never comes down to better teachers here or harder work. Teachers understand. It's one of the reasons why teachers oppose so-called performance pay for teachers, because we understand that depending on the cohort of students you have, the amount of resourcing you're given, the way staff shortages have impacted on your school, that can seriously affect what appear to be your student outcomes. And so in terms of teachers saying we deserve more because we have better results, I think the majority of teachers would say if we're fortunate enough to have better results, that does not reflect poorly on my neighbouring teacher who has a higher percentage of students with special needs and perhaps is taking a larger class.
Right. Isn't this the general problem with what's happened to the status of teaching? In my time in public life, it's dropped significantly, the status of teaching and the public regard for teaching, exactly because of the reason you've outlined, that excellence is not recognised and rewarded in its own right. There's always this levelling down mentality, always a set of excuses to level down something out of the old Soviet Union that's a hopeless failure. Don't you need to reward and applaud excellence in its own right and reward people accordingly? And then the whole status of teaching will lift, rather than the levelling down mentality, which is just so counterproductive.
I'd like to say, Mr. Latham, that I think the premise on which you're basing that is false. In the face of such inequity between school systems, I don't think you can compare.
But you've got
like
the
with
best
like.
schools. You've got the best schools. Why?
I would certainly say
I can tell you the reasons why the failing schools are failing, but you've got the best schools. Why don't you argue for stronger rewards for your teachers?
I would argue that there are excellent schools in all sectors, in the government, in the Catholic systemic,
levelling
and in
down.
the independent. And it's not about levelling down. It's about
Every statement you've made about thunk, a dead hand on excellence. And
Oh no, Mr.
recognising
Latham, I don't see at all how
performance.
that's a dead hand on excellence. All schools strive for excellence with the resources that they have. At the moment, resourcing does not just come down to money. It comes down to allowing teachers to do their job and doing something about the workload intensification. Workload intensification is what causes levelling down. It's far more responsible for a perceived decline in outcomes than anything else that you wish to discuss. Workload intensification and the loss of agency of teachers to do what is best for their students has had a catastrophic effect on outcomes. And we would argue that the profession believes in needs-based funding and a far more equitable education system.
Can I ask a further question about, you mentioned the frustrations driving exits. I wanted to ask about the accreditation system. There was a decision by the government a little while ago to cancel a whole range of approved courses for the 50 registered hours that are required to maintain accreditation.
Yes.
I'm getting feedback from teachers that has resulted in a shortage of available courses to meet your accreditation, and that in turn is driving a situation where teachers are feeling more anxious about maintenance of accreditation. That's more stress on teachers. Are you getting similar kind of feedback from your members about the accreditation system and that sort of choke point that's been created by the government's decision?
Yes, absolutely. When we consider that at the moment that situation is partially masked by the fact that we have a huge cohort of pre-2004 teachers, I'm one of those teachers, and we are at the moment within an extension period, and we will need to submit by the end of this year. However, most of that group of teachers have long ago achieved their 50 hours of accredited PD. So the problem of inaccessibility is at the moment partially masked by the fact that there's a large number of teachers who at the moment are not in need of that accredited PD. They can fulfil the rest of their hours with elective PD. However, in a very short period of time, we are going to be facing a situation where there is very limited accredited PD available. According to NESA's website, they have roughly in the order of 500 accredited PD courses, and only a very small amount of those are free. All of the others, and we're talking in excess of 450 of those courses, attract large fees. Large fees are applicable. This was never an expectation that teachers would need to pay for professional development in order to maintain their accreditation. In the past, schools were also able to accredit their staff meetings, where those staff meetings met the criteria for accredited PD, and in many cases they did. However, because the application process for accredited PD has become far more difficult and more onerous and time-consuming, many schools have withdrawn from that process altogether and are no longer attempting to register their staff meeting time as accredited PD, which also adds pressure to a teacher's capacity to complete those 50 hours.
They have to do it in their own time.
It has to be done in their own time, and at the current state of play, at significant cost. Many of the courses that are available are significantly priced, sometimes in the hundreds of dollars. The IEU was an endorsed provider of accredited PD, so we have had some success after significant effort to apply for accredited PD. But I can assure you from our own experience, it is an extremely time-consuming process. And we were delivering previously accredited PD. So it also limits the number of providers in the space who are able to provide accredited PD.
I mean, this is a big cost shift to teachers, isn't it?
As at the way things stand at the moment, that is the way it appears, yes. And it's soon, although, as I said, it's partially masked at the moment, that won't persist for much longer because there will be teachers who will be needing to accumulate their 50 hours. The other part that is problematic is the restriction to the 4 priority areas. So there are only 4 areas at the moment. Well, there is a 5th, but it's optional. The 4 priority areas relate to curriculum, student mental health, students with disability, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander education. The 5th and optional area is leadership. Now, while there is absolutely no question about the value or the validity of those areas, it certainly does limit teachers who believe they need to source out professional development in areas outside of those 4 priority areas, but they cannot claim it as accredited PD. So it doesn't assist with meeting that target.
Ms Abigail.
Chair? Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you so much, Ms Udall, for appearing again and contributing to our inquiry. I wanted to take you back to the bit about, you know, how much of not being able to fill teacher shortages is down to pay. I know that, you know, the IEU has members in a great variety of different types of schools, and although we think of independent schools sometimes as being, you know, the very sort of high fee-paying schools with the, you know, the pools and jacuzzis or whatever else they have, there is also, you know, the vast majority of your members are in the more low fee-paying Catholic schools. So the big difference then in terms of, I guess, not just pay, but also independent schools are at that 100% SRS or sometimes above. Mm-hmm. So if it's not pay that we're using to attract into that sector, what is the tangible difference, I guess, of working in an independent school that has 100% SRS? And would you agree that at least, you know, perhaps, I guess, has a beneficial impact compared to where the public schools are at?
I think, thank you for pointing out that the vast majority of independent schools are actually the local Catholic primary or secondary school, and certainly not with swimming pools and jacuzzis, and are often struggling with subpar facilities. Obviously, over time, that situation has improved in terms of the funding, and please correct me if I've strayed a little bit from what you were trying to ask me about. But in terms of the funding, it certainly is not going towards increase in teacher pay. And the reason that is such a contributor to the teacher shortage is because it impacts on our ability to recruit. Young Year 12 students who are looking at the comparison, who want to work in a profession and may have an interest in teaching, but look at the salaries that are available to them in other professions, can quickly see that whilst they may get off to quite a reasonable start, it isn't long before they hit a plateau that does not exist in other professions. So in terms of teacher pay, the issue is not so much the difference between what an independent school may be able to afford to pay their teachers, and that no doubt happens, but it doesn't apply to the vast majority of the teaching workforce who are locked into whatever the state cap dictates. It's about whether or not we can recruit young people into the profession of teaching without addressing the slide between the education profession and other professions. In terms of the experience of working in those schools, Ms Boyd, if that was part of your question, would you mind clarifying if you would like me to speak more to that?
Yeah, I would. Apologies, my question was a little bit convoluted, but it's yeah. I'm kind of curious, and perhaps it doesn't come into attracting teachers in the first place. Maybe it's more about retention. But as someone who has been lobbying for a long time for there to be 100% SRS at public schools, I think it would be interesting to know from your perspective whether the fact that that funding does, although it may not be going towards teacher salaries, that the funding for those schools increases or improves the experience of teachers, and do you think that you have better retention rates perhaps than what we see at public schools?
I would say in terms of retention, and obviously while we have a problem with early career teachers, we also have significant loss of experienced teachers, and whilst pay itself may be an aspect of that, teachers themselves tell us that it's the workload that is the issue. I'd also like to say that the IEU has said frequently and publicly that we believe in needs-based funding and that that should be equitably distributed. And we've made that statement publicly on a number of occasions.
And so I guess my final question then, and it's one that I asked the prior witness, was in relation to this idea of shortcutting qualifications, or reducing from 2 years to 1 year the time it takes to get your teaching qualification. Do you think that that would improve or actually exacerbate the teacher shortages issue in the long run?
Are you referring to the attempts to attract people who already have a degree and maybe moving from one profession, and talking about the current 2-year Masters of Teaching?
Yes, I am.
Yes. Look, the IEU strongly believes in the integrity of the teaching profession and the importance of qualifications. And obviously, as I referred to earlier, there is more to teaching than simply knowing the content. And obviously, we would hope that the time that was invested in preparing teachers who are coming out of one profession into education would address issues around the delivery of content, the best way to teach that particular subject area, behaviour management, all of the professional responsibilities that are not written down in any syllabus, but are an important part of a teacher's professional role in a school. The respect for confidentiality, discretion, professional boundaries between parents and teachers, between students and teachers. That sort of hidden curriculum that doesn't appear in any syllabus but which is vital. And we wouldn't like to see any shortcutting of that. However, that being said, if a shortening of that 2-year period was matched with far better support once a person moved into teaching in a school, then it may be something that was a viable proposition. We haven't had detail yet on what the intention is in terms of what it would look like. The IEU has attended several meetings with the New South Wales Council of Deans of Education and NESA, who are working on exactly what this would look like. So I don't have any detail really on which I can comment, but in terms of support or opposition for it, it depends on what the actual proposition would look like. Our concern is that people going into teaching, regardless of whether or not they're coming from one profession into education or they are new graduates, need a significant amount of support in order to be successful and to be long-term members of the profession. As we know, we have a significant number of teachers who joined the profession anticipating that they would be career teachers, that they would retire as teachers. And more we are seeing people leave the profession, but they're not leaving the workforce. They still have 10 or 15 years left to work, and this is not a situation that we have faced before.
Do you think there's a double standard that's being applied here? We've got a shortage of doctors and nurses, but no one's advocating for a cut in the degree qualifications for doctors or nurses, and yet they think it's appropriate to advocate for a reduction in the qualification time for teachers. Do you think that there's a double standard that's being applied?
Possibly, although there are a lot of double standards applied when you compare education and health and others as well, law perhaps. But I think if we are talking about trying to address the current crisis, I can see why this is being considered. However, it needs to be thoroughly and carefully considered in the light of the fact that we know that without appropriate support and appropriate training, people do not continue in the profession. And we don't want to add to the issues we already have after investing in people to try and address the shortage. Without the support, that investment is wasted.
Could I please ask about the question of workload? It seems that the paperwork workload issues, we hear more about them in the government sector. What is the situation in the non-government schools, and if the workload's less than and the red tape and so forth is less, what would explain that?
I would say the workload is not less and the red tape is not less. From my own experience and from my ongoing experience, even whilst working at the IEU, a lot of the issues that we deal with are workload related, and I'd like to, if I may, point to a few reasons why we are having these issues. One is over the last decade and a half, we have seen proliferation of intervention, I guess, in education, some from commercial interests, the rise of the education expert, and I won't use air quotes because it's objectionable, but if you would consider the number of people who generate evidence-based education initiatives, and these initiatives are sometimes implemented without proper consideration in schools. This is a situation that has escalated over the past several years. It is incredibly intensifying of workload, and often, unfortunately, does have a very short shelf life because one educational initiative is quickly supplanted by the next one. So this is something that the non-government sector appears to be equally susceptible to, if not more susceptible to, than the government sector. Possibly out of a need to, feel the need to compete, I'm not sure. At the union, we've coined the term initiative churn because that's the practical reality of it. We also have had, over the past several years, a proliferation in documentation and the juvenilisation of professional documentation. So when a teacher is trained to become a teacher, they initially generate program and assessment documentation that is far more detailed as part of their training. Once they are an in-service teacher, it is not possible to sustain that level of detail in a program, nor is it desirable, because it exhausts teachers for no reason, and everyone who is looking at the programs is presumably a professional and not needing explanatory text. However, we have seen a proliferation of that in our schools where excessive detail is being required. And with thanks to my colleague who coined this term, it's a bureaucratic edifice around documentation. And this is one of the reasons why we are optimistic about some of the work that can be done to address the teacher shortage, because a lot of this documentation that is excessive does not contribute to teaching learning outcomes and is in fact damaging. If you add to that the duplication that is happening, we have government agencies, regulatory authorities and employers all involved in the same space. Government agencies, as an example, the Federal Department of Education, who have the responsibility for overseeing the nationally consistent collection of data process for students with disability, which provides the funding for students with disability. It's vitally important. But over the last few years, the documentation that schools were being required to generate for that funding far exceeded what the department ever required. And the IU was engaged in some work with the Department of Education to clarify what was and was not required for the purpose of verifying the suitability of that funding. Now, in spite of that work, a tremendous document was produced which clarified what was and was not needed, but we're still in some places overcoming resistance to dismantling all of the duplicative documentation that is not required. You can look at NESA's compliance manuals in the same way. Compliance is another area where we are seeing layers of documentation that are being required. NESA are currently engaged in work on their compliance requirements to again make very clear what is and is not required. This will hopefully allow us to identify the source of the duplicated documentation and the usefulness of it. Obviously, employers have the right to request that their teachers provide documentation, but where that documentation is already being supplied elsewhere for either a government agency or a regulatory authority, it's an unnecessary addition to the workload. It doesn't provide any extra value. The final thing I'd just like to point to is the lack of connection to allied health. So if we're looking at workload intensification, there's a high number of students in Catholic systemic schools who require specialist support. So allied health professionals are often difficult to access. So that's a workload intensification that we share. I suspect we share all 4 of those issues with our counterparts in state schools. So that's the way we are as a union trying to address that, by working in that space, clarifying what is and isn't required, what is duplication, what could be either reduced or eliminated altogether. But I would argue that our issues are very similar, if not identical, to what's happening in the state system.
Right. I visited a Catholic school that tabulates, you mentioned too much documentation, they tabulate and record the sleeping habits of their students. Oh, this is just kooky, isn't it? That schools are now into having the kids record, I slept for 4 hours last night, I slept for 6, I slept between 11 and 5, and they keep records of this, and there's teachers, staff inside the school that, you know, regurgitate this stuff and meditate over it and make conclusions about it. I mean, why can't we just teach?
Exactly.
Well, these are self-inflicted wounds, aren't they? All this stuff.
Self-inflicted in this, I would self-inflicted in the sense that I'm not sure in the situation that you're quoting where it came from, whether it was.
The school's got a good reputation. I went there to hear about academic excellence, and I got this thing about sleep doctor, and walked out wanting to go to sleep myself.
Yes. Well, we're constantly in the position of asking what is the purpose of the documentation and for whom is it required? Because the situation we're facing is that a lot of this required documentation is a dead end. It doesn't go anywhere. It's not contributing positively to teaching learning outcomes. In fact, it's destructive because of the time that it takes. And where documentation is needed, it's usually frequently already being generated to satisfy genuine compliance requirements, either from a federal agency such as the Department of Education, our own New South Wales Department of Education, or a regulatory authority like NASA, who have been very helpful and clear about what they are trying to do in the space to alleviate this situation.
And what's an example of initiative churn?
Okay, an example of initiative churn would be a new mathematics program that involves different mathematical strategies and requires a total rewrite of the school's current mathematics program. It would involve extensive training of the teachers, usually after school. It would probably involve in-between meeting work where teachers were trying to implement the program and reporting back. After 6 months, and I'm speaking from personal experience here, that program was discredited, resulting in a new consultant and total rewrite again of a program, and all of this happening whilst the syllabus itself is unchanged.
Yep.
So this is not as a result of a change of a syllabus, it's a result of the impact of educational consultants, obviously well-meaning in many cases, and perhaps under instruction themselves to do this work. I'm certainly not attributing any malice or intent to cause a problem. But initiative churn is a significant issue, perhaps particularly in primary, where teachers are generalist and they may be facing this sort of program intervention across multiple key learning areas.
Does this happen more in schools that are struggling? From what I've seen, the top schools know what they're doing. They've got established systems and pedagogy programs, and they stick to them and they continue to get good results. Why change a winning formula? I suppose it's their attitude. Struggling schools, though, go through this cycle of fads, and I love that expression, initiative churn, where they're kind of desperate. Some new thing in maths, let's give it a go. 6 months later, they've dug a deeper hole, haven't they?
Well, of course, and it's not good teaching practice. It doesn't take into account the student readiness, and it doesn't allow student consolidation. So even if the teachers wanted to persist with it, believing that perhaps it might have merit, sometimes there isn't any option, and the teachers have lost the agency to continue with something that they believed was working, or alternatively, to get rid of something which isn't. Perhaps disadvantaged schools may be susceptible, but we tend to find that it operates in clusters. So schools may be clustered geographically, even within a sector or system, and it may be that that's a particular initiative adopted by a cluster of schools. So when we are hearing about this initiative churn, we are often hearing about it from several schools at once.
Is this driven by private commercial interests, you think?
Sometimes, certainly not always. There is a lot of good work, obviously, also being done in the research and education space. And the Australian Education Research Organisation itself, instituted to try and make sure that what was happening in school was evidence-based. And obviously, the IEU is supportive of the aims of AERO, if I can shorten it to that. However, we have asked AERO to provide guidance to schools about the implementation of initiatives, because sometimes even a good initiative can be damaging if it's introduced at a time when other initiatives are also happening, or perhaps it contradicts the previous initiative. So we have asked and they have produced. Certainly not just at our request, I'm sure it was something they intended to do anyway, but we wanted to stress the importance of the implementation, proper consultation with teachers about the implementation of educational initiatives.
Thank you. Aileen McDonald.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Udell, and thank you for coming, so very early in the school term. So, as you know, we had an inquiry last year. I'm not sure whether you've had a chance to read the report or the responses. I was just wondering, in terms of this inquiry, what could you offer that's different from the previous? Like, what could you add that wasn't part of the previous inquiry with respect to the government response?
With respect to the government response?
Yeah, and also noting that they wouldn't have had any time yet to implement a lot of that.
No. Look, one thing I would like to comment on, and perhaps it was covered and I may have missed it, but the Department of Education has commenced a range of initiatives. The Quality Time program is one. I think the most recent report was July last year, and so again, it's still underway with the aim of reducing teacher workload and streamlining processes. At the point when the inquiry took place last year, I'm not sure how much that was discussed, and obviously it's a laudable attempt to perhaps move some of the duties that would have been undertaken by teachers to support staff, thus freeing up teachers. What I would like to perhaps add is that the reason why, in our view, these initiatives have not been as successful as perhaps it was hoped is because those two issues around a professional pay increase and workload intensification that teachers are solely responsible for has not really been the focus in our sector. In the government sector, they've gone quite a long way, I believe, to generating resources that will do something about initiative churn, because they will put a sort of imprimatur on the resources and will hopefully stop schools from moving from one to the other. We're not sure at this stage what sort of access the non-government sector will have to those resources, and we struggle with employers in that sector to get much movement, certainly not quickly. And I think in the 4 items that I referenced just a few minutes ago, with the exception of the connection to allied health, the other 3 areas around juvenilisation of documentation, duplication and initiative churn, something could be done about those things this week, because they are process-driven, they're processes. There's no cost. In fact, they would have a positive impact immediately. And so we have been very focused on trying to convince the non-government sector of the value of providing the sorts of resources that the government sector are trying to provide. And whilst they're very worthwhile, without addressing the workload intensification for teachers and the quality and the salary cap, the initiative itself, the Quality Time program, I don't believe, with the best will in the world, will be as successful as hoped.
Thank you. Well, we're up against time. Thank you very much for your evidence, Veronica, and all the best for the school year.
Thank you very much.
We've now moved into, and we thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Have a good morning, everyone.
And now we adjourn for our lunch break. Being 1 o'clock, we can recommence our hearing and welcome Kate Lanny from the Gregory Hills community, and Kate appeared before us previously in the infrastructure inquiry. Thanks very much for your time, and Hannah Venezuela for coming along, also from Gregory Hills. So you should have some documentation in front of you to swear yourself in, either by oath or affirmation. So if you could just go through that formality, a couple of Bibles, yeah. And thanks very much for your time today. Hannah, do you want to start?
Yep. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And I think you need to state your name and capacity in which you're here.
So my name is Hannah Valenzuela.
Yep.
I'm a parent of the community of Gregory Hills. I will have to state as well that I am a teacher, but I am putting my parent hat on today.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
And Kate, thank you.
I swear that the evidence given now to be... Sorry, I'll start over. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Great. And if you could just say your name for Hansard and your position.
Yeah, so I'm Kate Laney, and I'm a parent of a child, of children that have been in both Gledswood Hills Public School and now Gregory Hills Public School, and we're residents of Gregory Hills.
Fantastic, thank you. And it's available for you before we go to questions from the committee members, just to make a short statement to outline the issues that you're concerned about. Kate and Hannah, you can each make a statement, or just one of you, whatever suits.
It's very informal, don't worry. It's okay.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Feels like a lot more formal than the last time I did this on the Zoom.
Yeah, no, we're just having a chat.
Home ground advantage for you.
Home game for you in Camden.
True, thanks for coming out. It's a quick drive. So, I guess I've had a child in school now going on for 5 years. He first started at Oran Park Public School for kindergarten, and then Gledswood Hills was opened in 2020. He moved there, and I've seen the number of children grow over this last 5 years really fast. And in speaking with other family members who live outside of the area, they've always been really amazed at the number of students at the schools and how that growth has been. So I think that there's a huge problem that we've been sort of coming up with over this time, with the number of kids coming through and the need for teachers in general. But I definitely think that specifically there's a huge problem with absent classroom teachers. And I just want to put forward, first of all, that I am not being critical in any capacity towards any teachers. I think they do a stellar job, and it's strictly in terms of their face-to-face teacher time and the amount of time that they have to be taken away for other roles, whether they be administrative, RFF, or absenteeism for illness or otherwise. I think that in this classroom, the kids are facing a lot of absentees. I mean, especially that's really exacerbated in a school of Gledswood Hills size, where there's over 1,000 students. They do struggle to find casual teachers to fill classroom teacher positions on a regular basis, and obviously that grows with the size of the school. That is really exacerbated. They're not looking for just one teacher, a casual teacher a day. They're looking for multiple. Either if there is no casual available, the classes get split across the other classes, either in their grade or a grade above or below that. And they're sent with a split workbook that they have to work through. They don't actually participate in the classroom program that's happening in that classroom. This is like feedback that I've received from both other parents who I've spoken to and my own personal kids' experiences. And I think that when they are split into those classes, their continuity and consistency in the learning that they're following is not it gets a little bit broken, and it's hard for the teachers taking them on to integrate like back into their classroom. So I think that's why they use these split books. But the children do find that it is difficult to follow the work that they're given, and they're obviously less likely, because it's not their familial teacher, to ask questions when they're struggling. And then sometimes those children don't actually get any work completed or assistance with the work. So that leads to a whole lot of time lost. And I remember being given the compulsory attendance letter that the department offers, and that states that if your child misses one day a fortnight for a whole year on average, that they will, over the weeks they miss in 1 year is 4 weeks of school, and the years over their school life is a whole year of education that's missed. So all of these little bits of time that they don't have their proper face-to-face learning is going to be impacted over the years that they spend at school. A friend of mine actually said that she believed that her child's teacher was absent on average 1 day a week for one whole term last year, and that equates to 2 weeks of that 10-week term. So there's a huge, I'm not saying that they'll be losing all of that time, but a considerable amount of that time when they don't have their face-to-face teacher, because they're juggling, extra children coming into their classes and thus making the class sizes bigger as well. And I think that when the kids are being moved so often, there's a struggle for them to develop their relationships with their teacher and get that familiarity, so that they're confident to ask questions, and especially in the catered to area. I also did hear from a parent of a school somewhere in the Campbelltown region that had a Year 7 class being taught over a megaphone in the school hall for maths for Year 7. So that I was quite surprised to hear that. So I can't really attest to the older groups of children in high school and the impact of that, but I'm sure that they'd be put more onto their own self-study on technology, which, that leaves room for not making those social connections and developing their relationships with their teacher and learning in like that full capacity. So, yeah.
So similar to Kate, I have had some similar grievances in regards to split classes with my son in that at Gledswood Hills. I'm
Excuse
not
me,
sure.
Hannah, maybe if you just draw the microphone a bit closer to you, that helps. So.
No worries. So I'm not sure who Kate was talking about, but I think it may be somebody that was in my son's class. Because in term 3, that's pretty much what happened in regards to his teacher, due to illness of herself, family members, as well as moving into, because she's quite an experienced teacher, moving into like the AP role within the school. She was away quite a bit in term 3, and it was very much probably at least once a week, if not more, throughout that term. And it wouldn't surprise me if the kids were split for about 2 weeks, like Kate has said. The split books have been an issue in our home. My son has said to me that he finds it difficult to follow along with the split book, and he's quite an anxious child, so he doesn't like to put his hand up, especially even though he's been going into the same classroom for his split class throughout the whole year. He's not familiar with that teacher because it's not his usual teacher. Another issue that when there is casuals, they're not consistent casuals. So he's never had the same casual more than once. He won't know their name. When I say, oh, who was your casual teacher today, he won't remember their name. So again, that continuity, that familiarity that he would normally receive, it kind of goes out the window at the moment, and that's something that we've kind of had in that regard. I won't talk too much about the split classes because Kate covered it quite well. So something else that I'm quite fearful of because of certain family members that have gone through this quite a bit is the idea that teachers may not be permanent, and my fear is that because I've got a very anxious son, his teacher is going to leave halfway through the year to seek permanency elsewhere. I know that with, again, somebody that I know, they had a very competent teacher. She was very experienced, and she was teaching a high achieving class, who had to leave halfway through the year because although she was seeking permanency at the school she was at, she was very happy. She was temporary for a number of years, and an opportunity came up and she had to leave. Because of the lack of teachers, the teacher that they did have cover the class was an interim approval teacher. So it was a teacher who had done a prac previous in the year with that class, but she was not even out of uni yet. She still had another semester to finish at uni, and she was given this high achieving class which was meant to extend, and as far as I know, the class was kind of stayed stagnant, according to the person that I've spoken to. Their child didn't move throughout that year, for the rest of the year because of that. So another issue I've had personally is in regards to the support in the classroom. So throughout the year, it just seems like my son's teacher for last year especially was very busy. All the time she was very, very busy. Whether that was taken up by administrative stuff, I don't know. But it was very, very difficult to catch time to speak to her throughout all of last year, and part of the year before. I had been trying to seek some OT for my son, just because we feel he might have some sensory processing issues. And just to kind of convey that to her in the beginning took weeks, because you've got 20 plus other parents who are trying to speak to this teacher who you have maybe she has maybe 2 minutes to talk to each parent in the beginning, just at school pickup time. It's just not enough time to kind of get round, and by the time you do get round to sending an email or leaving a phone call, you almost feel guilty trying to steal that time away from her. Often whenever I would email or leave a message on the school platform to communicate with their teacher, the responses I would get would be quite late at night. So, I'd get a message at 10 o'clock at night, and then there would be this overwhelming guilt that I've just taken time away from this lady's family. She's meant to, she's got a young family herself, and yes, I need an answer because I need to seek an answer for my own child, but, what gives me the right to take that away from her? She's working up until 10 o'clock at night. It's just nuts to me. So that's that. The other thing I kind of found with the lack of support in the classroom was my son is very passionate about science and maths, but it just felt like there was no time to extend him in those areas. And I'm not saying he's the brightest in the class or anything like that, but that's something that we tried to foster at home. He's got a passion for something, we're going to explore that a little bit more, and it'd be nice if that could kind of happen at school, but it just seems like there isn't enough time to do that. And the things that he does lack in, so, other areas like art and things like that, where he's probably below average or middle of the pack, it just feels like he kind of gets forgotten a little bit because he is in the middle. I think with COVID, a lot of the parents I've spoken to who do have kids who are struggling, they are getting a lot of support to try and boost their children up. But because my child's not at the bottom, it's almost as if he's sitting there waiting for everybody else to catch up, that he can't move any further forward just because there's a lack of time. We talked about that. And the last thing I kind of wanted to touch on was just in regards to bullying and things like that in the playground. So whenever there's a casual teacher in the classroom, if there's ever, last year there was a child in my son's class who was a very difficult child, and there were a lot of issues around that, and not last year, the year before that when he was in kindergarten, and there were a lot of supports in places with his teacher at that time to stop the bullying and things like that happening. But whenever there was a casual, because it wasn't a consistent person throughout the school, it was always chaos that day. It was the same in the playground. If there was somebody unfamiliar in the playground, it becomes hard for my son especially to go and seek help because there's just a strange casual in the playground. And that's kind of all I've got.
Thank you. Thanks, Hannah.
That's
and
right.
We'll go to the Labor opposition for questioning.
Thanks very much. Can I say thank you to both of you for sharing your stories and also for the efforts you've clearly gone to talk to other parents and to give us some insight about what's happening across the region. One of the things, actually, before we sort of get into it, I'd be keen, you're both mums who have had kids at Gledswood Hills and now at Gregory Hills, is that right? Now
Kate is at Gregory Hills. I haven't moved across.
Yeah, so my kids just started at Gregory Hills yesterday.
Yeah.
My eldest was there from the opening at Gledswood Hills, so he was there for 3 years, but prior to that he was at Oran Park for kindergarten. Wow. Because of obviously the lack of school situation at that time. So.
And we have visited both Oran Park and Gledswood Hills in our previous inquiries. Yeah. I'd just be keen, given that it's just open, just to sort of hear what your experience is of Gregory Hills, the new site, and if there's been any issues.
Well, given that it's only been 1 day, I can't really say that I've had too much to do with that. Like, we just sent the kids off. But I will say that the way that they've structured the classes, originally my initial concern about moving my eldest, who was in Year 4 this year, was that they were going to be having a 3-4-5 class. And although he was in a 3-4 composite last year, I was a bit concerned about that moving forward, just because it's spanning 2 stages. So although his classroom teacher assured me that for things like geography and the other extra STEM subjects, they're not, that's all the curriculum is on the same level for a stage. It's just the maths and that are slightly up or down. She said that, they, it's relatively, like, they've got things in place to help, and it's not as difficult as it seems to someone maybe who's not a teacher. And I found that so I knew that might be a problem going into it. Now, last night they added a new class the day before the day was starting, so he's actually in a full Year 4 class there. Okay. But my son, who's gone into Year 2, has actually gone into a 2-3 class. Yeah. So there's 1-2 classes, 1-2-3 class, a Year 4 class, and a 5-6 class. Now, I actually am concerned about my other son now because he's across 2 different stages. So I've always kind of thought it's a bit hard to do composite classes. I've personally been in them myself when I was in primary school, but I think that they obviously make those classes because when you've got 10 kids left over that don't make up a class in year 3 and then the same in year 4, they like to push them together because they don't want to give extra funding for an additional teacher. I think that's a bit of a backwards situation because I feel that if the children would all benefit if they roughed out those numbers and made them smaller, it would have also allowed, like I know particularly when we were growing at Ledswood Hills in 2020, that first year there was 3, year 1 classes, and by the end of the COVID lockdown they had added 2 more classes to that school for that grade alone. And I was really blown away. There was a lot of shuffling around of classes that particular year, and that year the school actually used up all of their extra classrooms that they had spare at the start, and then needed the demountables for the start of the 2021 year, which is when her first and my second started kindergarten. And because I'd already been at Oran Park with the 48 demountables that they had there in 2019, I was like, what's going to happen? I know the school classrooms are full. What's the plan? And then they put in the 18 demountables to cater for that new influx of children. So there was a lot of shuffling around because they didn't allow room. And I know that that's probably not the case at all schools in the area, but in the growth areas like our area, I feel like that they could have alleviated a lot of issues if they had have just kept a bit of space there to shuffle around. Obviously you can't allocate always for that, and they probably didn't really expect the numbers to grow as quickly as they did either, but that would have helped soften it, because I know a lot of parents were really frustrated in that year 1 that their kids were moved 2 or 3 times. So he had kids in his class that had moved a number of classes in that time frame. So,
Okay, can I just ask, with the pop-up school, do you know, or can you estimate how many enrolments they've got?
I believe that there was 80 kids coming in for kindergarten. They started today.
Right.
And I believe that Mrs. Rourke said that there was 197 kids that they were starting with. And I think that was just including kindergarten as well. Because I knew that when they did a pop-up information session, I was talking to her, she said that they had 75 kids for kindy, and then the rest, there was another 75.
So weighted kindy new starters and other students that moved from other schools.
Yeah, so kindy was half of it, and then the rest was made up over the rest of the grades.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And is there any guide as to when you get permanent buildings there?
The school infrastructure have said that they're hoping for it to be mid next year, but that's dependent upon approvals for the DAs and stuff like that, and that they're currently assessing submissions on it. They do have the contractor who built the temporary pop-up school is the one who's going to be doing the contract for the main build. I actually ran into him at the gate last week, one afternoon, just having a little sticky beak, and he said that they're hoping to start by the end of March with that. But I said, so will that be ready for term 1 next year? And he said, no, it won't. It'll probably be a year. And I was like, that, to me, just as a generic outsider, that doesn't seem like that can work, because I believe that the pop-up school had a cap of 300 kids that they can fit on that site, and there's not really anywhere for them to add extra. I mean, there is a grassed area, but do we really need to do that again? I believe that they're keeping the cap. But next year, to start next year, I think a lot of people in the area, once they realise that school will be in the brand new building the following year, I think a lot of people want to move, but they won't be able to accommodate that if it's not ready for term 1, day 1 next year, because they'll have the cap in place still, and I just don't see how it would be possible to move the school in the middle of the term. I think it's a bad
80
idea.
kindies a year, they're obviously, way over the top.
And I think a lot of people might realise too, because Gledswood Hills is having a second stage built in one of their limited areas, that there's going to be less room. There's going to be a lot of disruption to the school itself, and I think a lot of people may end up moving across later on. I think that there was a bit of hesitancy because of like being ingrained at Gledswood, and it's a pop-up, so it's temporary and that. So yeah.
Has there been any issues with people who live in Gregory Hills having access to Gregory Hills Primary School, to the pop-up?
I think initially there was. I know of somebody who lives in Gregory Hills who initially there was a catchment, there was a line that was drawn down Gregory Hills Drive. So there was a pocket of people who live on one side, which essentially is across the road from the school, that became a part of the Gledswood Hills catchment area. So they would have to stay even though they wanted to move across. But I'm pretty sure the principal at Gregory Hills has rectified that.
Yeah, her and Lisa changed. They made an agreement, but then they actually got it formally changed with the Department of Education. So now the kids across the road can. But that kind of happened all too late, I think.
Yeah, because I wasn't even aware of that until probably the end of last year, like late last year that had happened.
There's a family that I'm thinking of that live just on the other side of the road there with 3 children. And I think if she'd have probably known that might have changed her decision, but it was quite late in the game that happened. So
and I think that's for because I'm still considering moving across, but I think the idea that everything's happened so late in the year, and even Kate herself only
decided
last week to make the change. That's what's holding a lot of people off it. But it's, I think what Kate's saying, that a lot of people may still go across. Like I myself still am considering, is it better if we just move across because we could just walk to school then?
And that's why you came here, right? Like that's why you bought where you bought, and you expected that there would be a school that you could walk to and access and be part of the community, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
My eldest was 1 when we bought. And
I wasn't even married. I wasn't married, didn't have kids, anything like that. So we were very naive when we bought, and we listened to what the developer had said, and we assumed that with the amount of houses that were going in, and not just in our area, but Oran Park and Willowdale, Denham Court, Lepping, everywhere, that the infrastructure would just automatically go in. So when they said to us, it'll be, a couple of years, me and my now husband said, okay, so we can slowly start, we can get married, we can, wait a couple of years before we have kids, and all of that kind of ticked along. And then my son's all of a sudden starting school, and there's still no school. Is he going into year 2 now, and it's only just opened. So 3 kids later, we've finally got one.
Oh, sorry, can I keep going?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just interested to know, in terms of the actual boundaries for the school, was there any consultation with local parents? Or, I know there's a really active parents group in Gregory Hills, so I'm just interested to know what consultation there was about those actual boundaries.
In regards to the boundaries, I don't think there was, I think that was something that was talked about specifically with Lisa Whitfield, the principal, and school infrastructure. We were brought in for a meeting, but it was, when we questioned it, they said, that's already been sorted. The boundary is this, and
because
that was just it. They just had to draw a hard line somewhere, is what they said.
Yeah, we actually were, did you go on and speak to school infrastructure with some of the recommendations and things like that?
With Juliana?
Yeah. So we actually were brought in with school infrastructure when they were talking about the initial plans and that sort of thing. And one of the issues that we brought up was the kids crossing safely across Gregory Hills Drive to the other side of the road. And I said, well, why can't you make an overpass there? Because the lights are further down and you have to go past the shopping centre car park. And they were like, oh, it's a bit difficult. And I think that's why they ended up changing the boundary to mark it down the main road so that they didn't have to do that. But then that's when the complaints started coming in from parents on the other side to both principals. And then that's when they were like, we can't do this to them. Like, we need to allow that that's going to be an option. So they eventually changed it to open the boundary up for that reason. So they did work through that, but now they've got the issue that they'll still have to come up with an idea to get it safely across there, because we know that they don't want to make it 40 along that road too.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it also doesn't it goes then to the poor planning, right? Like, you know that that's the school site.
Yeah.
When you're these are new built areas. Like, understand that it's not like we're working within an existing suburb here. You can say, well, I'm going to put the traffic lights here so that I can allow safe crossing, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Rather than retrofitting.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think the thing that I would be really interested in, especially from you, Kate, is, like, obviously you've seen the growth issues around Oran Park and then Gledswood Hills and then Gregory Hills. These are schools that we feel quite well versed in this committee, because we've talked about the challenges and that some of those challenges have been repeated over time. I think for this inquiry, I'd be interested to hear about the age and the experience of the teachers that you've experienced across those different schools. Like, have you seen that there's been a high number of sort of newly graduated teachers, or has there been a bit of a mix across the board?
At Oran Park, my son had an older, more experienced teacher, and she was amazing. I was like, oh my goodness. But there was 14 kindergarten classes that year, so there was a mixture of older, more experienced teachers. Yeah. There was definitely still a lot of
what
young...
year was that? 14?
2019.
Yeah. Wow.
That was, that he started kindergarten there.
So that's 280 kids.
No, 2019 he was there.
Okay.
Yeah, he's in year 4 this year.
Wow.
Is that right? Yeah, that's
Yeah. My daughter's the same age. Yeah, it's 2019.
Sorry. I doubt myself then, sorry. So he had an older teacher, but they had a new grad come into the classroom for definitely a term. I can't remember exactly if it was longer than that or not. There was a lot of other younger teachers. One of the teachers that was one of the younger ones there, she's actually at Gregory Hills this year. She was at Gledswood Hills as well, so she's been at all 3 now, so I recognised her. But yeah, there was, what I will say actually is that there was not very, I don't know if I remember any male teachers at the Gregory Hills School the other day, yesterday. I think they were all female. But yeah, there were some younger ones and some ones that seemed a little bit older than that. But I would say on the whole, there's probably, there's definitely a lot of younger ones. There is a smattering of that, but at Gledswood, there's so many teachers. I don't even know half of them. So, but just from because I had my kids were in 2 different stage groups, so I was doing double, with the older kids and then the younger kids, so there was definitely a mixture, but I'd say more younger overall. But
can I just add to that? So during COVID, a lot of the online work that was given, the teachers obviously shared that amongst themselves and were creating resources, so I suppose to lighten the load. So the faces that we did see in my son's kindergarten class were all very young. I think there was maybe 2 out of 12 classes? 2 out of the 12 classes where the actual teachers looked like they were maybe a touch older than me, not very much older than me, but a touch older. Most of them looked very young, just from what I could tell.
I think my colleague's got some questions.
Abigail Boyd on WebEx.
Thank you very much, Chair. I thought you'd forgotten me. Thank you very much to our witnesses for appearing this afternoon. I just wanted to touch on something that you were saying during the opening statements. I thought it was really compelling, the comparison of, the impacts of absenteeism with the impacts of attending school but not really being effectively taught, and the parity between those two things. But one of the things that we don't, hear about as much is not just the impact of teacher shortages on learning outcomes in terms of subject matter, but also the disruption that it has on children, particularly those with anxiety, those with autism, with other types of things where those sort of constant changes of teachers and not knowing who's going to be teaching you in which room is a sort of a compounding impact on disadvantage. Are you able to share with us any sort of stories or personal experiences of how it feels to be a child in a school with such a disrupted schedule?
I'd say you're probably better.
Yeah, so like I said, my son is, he's not super anxious, but he does get very funny when it comes to people or adults that he's unfamiliar with and he has to perform for. So if he has to answer a question and he doesn't know you, he's going to shut down. And generally when he does that, he doesn't have the rest of his days constantly thinking about that in particular. So it takes a while, I suppose, and it takes somebody who knows him to kind of pull him back out of his own thoughts and thinking about, I've made a mistake and now I look silly. So being in a classroom where, perhaps a teacher, and I haven't heard anything from him about this, but, if I was thinking about him and situations he's been in previously where he gets put on the spot and he's unable to answer it, he does hold that, he gets very upset about it. And I suppose that is my main issue with him and not having somebody that's consistent. I remember and I'm talking about myself here, but I remember when I was in primary school, whenever there was a casual, it was a consistent casual. It was somebody that I had seen before multiple times, who had taken the class multiple times. It was almost as if the school had hired her specifically to do casual work. And I know that that's probably very difficult in a school that's as large as Gledswood Hills. But to see somebody who has a familiar face would make so much difference to my son. And I suppose even if it was only once or twice, at least he knows who he's getting, and what's to come and what the expectations are for that classroom. I hope that's answered your question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really good. Thank you.
Any other questions? Because unfortunately we've run over time and we've got our last witness for the day.
No, that was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Thank you. And all the best for the school year.
Thanks very much.
you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Hopefully some permanent buildings will pop up too.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah,
Fingers
that'd be
You make a good point though about term 1 next year.
Pardon?
You make a very good point about term 1 next year though.
Yeah, that's not going to work. That's
Yeah.
not going to work, and I don't think you need to be a teacher or an educator to realise that that's going to be really difficult for all of the schools, like Gledswood especially. The uncertainty of they're like, oh, are you coming? Are you not? So, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry,
Thank
one
you.
final question.
Cheers.
Gledswood Hills, any new demandables this year? Do you know?
I don't know.
Oh, I haven't heard anything on. Yeah, I'm not sure.
There was last year. I think they added 6 more.
Yeah.
I think there was 22 altogether now.
I'm not sure what the numbers are or anything along that.
You might find that out once you're daughter goes to kindy.
Yeah.
Starting next.
Actually, I did help put together the resource boxes. I've probably got the numbers. I did tally the numbers if you wanted to know that for each class. How many classes I have across the years. Did you want to know that?
That'd be awesome if you
Give me 1 second. I'll pull it up because I just like to keep notes.
Yeah, that's okay.
Take it on notice and then just send us.
Okay. Yep. No worries.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Alrighty.
And our final witness for the day is Craig Peterson, the President of the New South Wales Secondary Principals Council. Thanks, Craig, for your time today and appearing as a witness. So after you take your seat, there should be some documentation there to help you swear yourself in, either with an oath or affirmation. Thank you.
I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
And if you just state your name and position, and it might also be helpful to outline the schools of which you're the principal as well.
Certainly, I am the President of the New South Wales Secondary Principals Council. We're the professional association representing approximately 500 principals of public schools in New South Wales with secondary enrolments. I'm not currently a principal in a school. I was previously the principal at Forbes High School from 2006 till 2010, and more recently the principal of Denison College of Secondary Education, which is a multi-campus college in Bathurst. Bathurst High and Kelso High being the two campuses, and I was the college principal there from 2011 until June of last year.
Right. Have you got sabbatical now, or...?
No, I'm full-time in the role of President. I have been full-time in the role of President of SPC since June of 2019.
Okay, thank you. And Craig, it's available to you to make a short opening statement if you so wish.
Certainly, thank you. Mr Chair, committee members, thank you for the opportunity to appear today. I'd like to start by saying that I don't have access to systems-level data, so I won't be able to provide specific statistics and data to questions. What I can provide is a deep understanding of and description of the experiences of principals from across the field, across all of New South Wales, in relation to the current teacher shortage and its impact on student outcomes. I acknowledge recent efforts by the department to address teacher shortages in New South Wales. Our colleagues in HR are dedicated and doing the best they can in the current circumstances. But SPC has been warning of increasing teacher shortages for well over a decade. We initially identified difficulties in staffing our rural and remote schools, but we also flagged at the time that we saw evidence of the issue beginning to impact in regional centres as well as some harder to staff areas in metropolitan Sydney. We foreshadowed that this was likely to get worse without deliberate action. Federal funding for tertiary education has contributed to the situation as initial teacher education providers have moved towards models of course delivery that favoured cheaper courses regardless of workforce demand, hence the shortage of TAS and science teachers. It's also difficult for systems to track or predict workforce demand. There's a problem with multiple regulatory authorities and the inability to see whether a teacher who appears to be on a New South Wales DOE list, for example, is actually really available for appointment or not. They could be working with the non-government sector, interstate, or enjoying a break overseas. Why does all this matter? Regardless of how technically low the percentage of unfilled vacancies is across the system, a single vacancy in a secondary school means that up to 6 classes may not be covered by an appropriately qualified teacher. That's potentially 180 students whose learning is likely to be impacted every day. It's not enough to just have any teacher in front of a class. Students need to have their teacher in front of them every day, and their teacher needs to be a teacher of that subject. Principals and teachers are exhausted and are feeling undervalued. As a couple of teachers told me at the beginning of last year, we still love teaching, but now we hate our job. I fear that if we will not solve this issue until we address salary and workload issues and provide the profession with the respect it deserves.
Thank you. Start with questions with the Labor opposition, please.
Yes.
I had a situation with my son just recently. It was very late in the piece where he got his timetable for Year 11, and I wonder whether you could give us some insight in terms of the timetabling difficulties that are created if you're unsure about whether you can fully staff a school. Can you perhaps talk us through what's involved and
Certainly.
how that might contribute to the problem?
Yeah. The timetabling operation in any school, and obviously I can talk with the expertise around secondary schools, having been a timetabler since about 1993 in various schools and various levels. Our timetabling process starts in August of the preceding year, and that's when we get our students to make their subject selections. Those subject selections traditionally in most schools have been driven by student interest, but also obviously there's an element of what are the physical resources we've got in terms of specialist rooms and in terms of specialist staff. We submit our anticipated enrolment numbers in mid-August every year, and then later and most principals at that stage will have applied a formula. They'll know if I've got X number of students, that will probably translate to this many staff. When I used to do that calculation, I could get it right to within 0.1 of a full-time equivalent entitlement. We then get our staffing entitlement, our anticipated staffing entitlement back, and that varies, can be later term 3, very early term 4, usually term 3. And that tells us that the numbers, if we've got enrolments going up, then obviously our staffing entitlement goes up. We then will declare a vacancy if someone's got a transfer, a promotion, a retirement, taking extended leave. That's when we go through our declaration of vacancies and our recruitment processes. It is often not uncommon for principals not to know prior to the end of the year who they will have in front of students the following year. Some of the reasons for that are because of the way the staffing operation evolves. We have a lot of principals who will hold on to a vacancy until term 4 to declare that vacancy, to advertise. That position that they then fill usually creates a vacancy somewhere else. A lot of promotions positions won't be advertised until term 4. The department's own corporate recruitment often doesn't occur until term 4. In fact, we had some corporate positions not being advertised until the last week of term last year. That obviously again creates a backlog of positions that need filling. For obvious reasons, corporate staffing shuts down over Christmas, New Year period, and doesn't reopen until late January. And we will submit our actual entitlement numbers, our actual enrolments, on Wednesday next week, the 8th of February, for our Eastern Division schools, and Wednesday the 15th of February for our Western Division schools. That will then generate the actual entitlement for the school, and that will then mean we can finalise our timetables. It's an ongoing process. Most secondary schools will not release a timetable until the last weeks or the last days of the preceding year, and that timetable is usually a temporary timetable, which then is replaced with a permanent timetable roughly around week 6 or week 7 of term 1.
So in that circumstance, how is it that you're able to say with any certainty that you're going to have a teacher for a specific subject, say it's a year 11 or a year 12 course that's being run, you've got the students, but you don't know you're going to need the teacher, and then because of teacher shortage you may not actually be able to recruit someone, so that class then starts the year no teacher. Is that a fair assessment of how it unfolds?
Usually we've got a fairly good idea of who we're going to have, particularly if we're in a school with stable staffing. And up until recently, most of our schools have had relatively stable staffing. That obviously varies. If you're in rural and remote parts of the state, you might have a significant churn of teachers. In other schools, in other locations, that can be quite stable. So you've got a relatively high degree of certainty. When we're allocating our staff, we would normally privilege our senior students because of the importance of HSC, obviously. And then it depends on how we go about it. It might be particular subjects which we need a timetable first. It might be our Year 7 cohort because we want them to have a good start to school. But we can't predict. I've had multiple occasions at the end of last term and during the Christmas holidays where principals have told me that teachers have told them without any notice that they're taking this year off, or they're not coming back, or they've got a job at somewhere else. We can't predict those. We can only cater for the vacancies that we know. A teacher's got a promotion or transfer, or they're retiring, or they've informed us in advance that they're taking the year off for whatever reason. We can plan around those and we can allocate our staff the best we can, but there's always the potential for something unforeseen to happen, and we can't put the teacher we thought we were going to put in front of that class next year.
And has the shortages made that process even more unpredictable?
Oh, absolutely it has. Absolutely. Because of the numbers, And then, because we're often putting temporary teachers, into a position, so if I've got 6 unfilled vacancies, for example, right now, or I knew I was anticipating 6 unfilled vacancies at the end of last year, I probably would have engaged local casuals to cover those positions. Those local casuals may or may not have qualifications in the area that I'm putting in front of. If I get a permanent teacher appointed during the Christmas holidays who has the appropriate codes, I'll obviously put that teacher on that class. So there's a lot of swapping and shuffling that will go on. The more teachers that I'm trying to fill the positions for, the more likelihood that there'll be that degree of churn and uncertainty in that initial timetable. The other thing that comes into play as well is where we've got an unforeseen either increase or decrease in our enrolments as we're going through this process over this week and next. We're usually pretty close to the mark in terms of who we're expecting and what we get, but if there is an unforeseen change, then that obviously adds to the complexity as well.
So we heard from, thank you very much for your testimony and for your time today. We heard from Angela Gabrielatos this morning. He talked about how the teacher shortages are the worst he's seen in living memory. And that they've deepened impacting students, particularly over the last couple of years. Is that your experience in terms of teacher shortages, given your long history in education in New South Wales?
Yeah, absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. I've never seen the difficulty that we've got recruiting teachers and school leadership teams that we have at the moment. As I indicated before, so a little bit of background. In 2013, I was seconded out of Denison College. I led the development of the Rural and Remote Education, a Blueprint for Action. Prior to that, I'd been part of the what's called the Futures Alliance, which is a partnership between PPA, the Primary Principals Association, Secondary Principals Council and the Department of Education at the time, working on the Rural Education Action Plan. And in 2012, we were identifying critical staffing shortages in some of our more remote and rural schools. As I said in the opening statement, we did see evidence of that starting to expand into regional and some areas of Sydney, particularly in southwest Sydney at the time. The situation has continued to get worse. To give you a specific example, and a personal example, as a college principal at Denison College, I was, and I still am employed as a P5 principal. That's the highest paid principal in most of our schools. We've also got an executive principal classification in our connected community schools. There's not many P5 positions in the state. My position at Denison College has been advertised twice already, because they haven't been able to find an experienced principal prepared to move to a regional centre like Bathurst to be paid a higher salary. Now that's one example. During the time that I was principal at Denison College, we would often find for our KLA head teachers, our English head teachers, science, maths head teachers, for example, if we advertised for a vacancy there, we might get 2 or 3 applicants only in Bathurst. Right? It's not an isolated, remote, undesirable location by any means. Classroom teachers, traditionally we would have no difficulty filling those positions. I know that this year Bathurst High Campus of Denison College is on the department's priority recruitment program because they simply can't fill their vacancies.
And do you have an idea of how many vacancies they have?
No, I don't know. I couldn't tell you at this stage. What I can tell you, though, was at the beginning of term 2 last year, there were 8 unfilled vacancies at that time, which were, part of that was exacerbated by a couple of teachers who were anti-vaxxers and who left for that reason. Those positions were being filled by the principal using local casuals. But what doesn't appear in the department statistics around that is that in addition to the 8 unfilled vacancies, there are an additional 12 vacancies created by teachers who are either on maternity leave, leave without pay, workers' compensation, or were working in seconded roles within the department. So while the apparent unfilled vacancies at that school at that time was only 8, the actual unfilled vacancies were 20. And this is where sometimes it's the questions around, well, what are you classifying as an unfilled vacancy? Because there can be a real difference between statistics and figures on a page and people in front of classes.
And in your experience, are you seeing, again this morning Mr Gabrielatos talked about how resignations are outstripping retirements and how early career teachers are leaving at record amounts. Is that your experience as well as a principal and in the conversations you have with other principals?
Absolutely it is. Absolutely. We've been concerned for a short period of time about the early resignations and separations, particularly amongst principal colleagues. Principals, we take on education for life as a chosen career, and traditionally most principals would not retire until they'd reached, or in some cases well and truly past the nominal retirement age. What we're seeing now are principals opting to take long service leave, often on half pay, pending retirement, and actually leaving the profession up to 2 years earlier than they otherwise would have. We're seeing principals who previously have worked beyond retirement age saying, I can't do this anymore, I don't have to do this anymore, I'm financially independent, and leaving the profession. We're seeing the same across the entire teaching service. We are suffering in two ways. One is through people choosing to go to entirely different careers. We're also losing our staff to non-government schools who've got the ability to offer significant enhancements to their salary. And in some of the information I got back from colleagues in a survey that I conducted in December last year, some colleagues were talking about private schools, non-government schools, offering 10, 20, up to $50,000 additional dollars for classroom teacher positions. And we simply cannot match that in any way at all. We've got no capacity to.
And they're obviously, we heard from the IAU today about the teacher shortages that they're experiencing as well. So it's really a flow-on effect. I'm interested just also, before I hand to my colleagues, because I feel like I'm hogging the time this afternoon, is in your experience as a principal and in the conversations that you have with other principals to represent them, how do you feel the intensification of the work has happened under local schools, local decisions? I mean, we've talked a lot about that in this committee, about how a lot of those supports that have been provided by the department have been cut, whether it's around literacy or curriculum support officers or requiring you principals to be building managers, building site managers as well as educational leaders. Do you feel that that's contributing to teacher shortages? Or certainly in the difficulties you talked about recruiting school leadership positions?
It's certainly impacting on school leadership recruitment. The differential between a top-of-the-scale classroom teacher and a head teacher is not that great. In fact, if you're a highly accomplished or lead teacher and you do HSC marking, you'll probably be earning more than a head teacher. The differential between a head teacher and a deputy principal is not that great. A lot of people who previously would have been interested in a leadership role have been turned off, as our head teachers in particular are becoming increasingly administrators or disciplinarians. And this is a great shame, because a lot of the discussion and a lot of the research in recent times is talking about the importance of having those master teachers. Well, in fact, our head teachers used to be called subject masters. Their role was to mentor, to build the capacity of their assistant teachers and to help them develop their craft. We've turned them into administrators. People, including deputy principals now, are looking at the principal's role and saying, there's no way that I would do that job. You can't pay me enough. Because they see the hours. Our data, we conduct every 2 years we conduct a principal SPC, Principal Wellbeing Survey. It actually predates the work that Professor Phil Riley and the Australian Catholic University have done. Our figures show that New South Wales secondary principals are working anywhere up to 65, 70 hours a week. And the workload has increased significantly. The work that the department has done in recent times around reducing the administrative burden and trying to streamline some of our processes is welcomed, but it tends to be tinkering around the edges. It might be reducing the number of keystrokes to get to a particular report on Scout, or pre-populating the annual school report. And that's fine, but it's not really looking at the fundamental issue, which is the burgeoning workload, and reducing by a couple of minutes a job that I only have to do once a year does not reduce my daily or weekly work. And that is turning people off the position. It is increasing the reporting of burnout and fatigue. that we're seeing, and again we capture that every 2 years in those survey reports. What we've also seen in the demographic survey that we did in November last year, and we had about 298 responses from either from current principals or principals who'd retired within the last 2 years. And one of the questions we asked is, if you've recently retired or you're planning on retiring within the next 2 years, what's the key reason? By far the biggest reason was unmanageable workload. Planned retirement was a long distance fourth or fifth.
I just want to ask about, I've heard evidence in past inquiries around unspent budgets in schools. I wonder whether you might be able to give us an insight on what drives that circumstance where there'll be a budget allocation to a school but they won't be able to spend the money that's allocated.
Look, there are many reasons. The two most common around that would be that I've got budget dollars. It's probably sitting in what we would call our equity loadings. It's sometimes called the Gonski money. The main reason that a principal won't spend that is because they can't find the staff. The second reason that principals won't spend significant sums of money is that they've got a capital project, renovations, a new room, they want to build a conversion, and they're waiting for school infrastructure to give them the approval to go ahead, and sometimes those approvals can take up several years in some cases. There's other reasons as well. We've had it can be poor planning. It can be a lack of available alternate resources. So we know there's a new curriculum coming out, so we're reluctant to buy new textbooks this year. Let's wait for the new syllabus to come out. Can be those sorts of things. But far and above everything else is the lack of teaching staff and waiting for those approvals to make infrastructure improvements.
Can I ask just also about the equity funding? One of the propositions that has been put to us is that it's a driver of the insecure employment in the system, that people are engaged using the equity loading under the RAM funding model, but people are engaged on a temporary basis because principals can't commit to permanent employment funded through that funding source. Can I offer some comments on that?
Yep. Look, that's certainly an element as well. Principals can use that fund to create what we call ASIP, above centrally identified positions. A lot of principals aren't particularly aware of that, and if they are, they're afraid to commit to that because if their funding decreases for whatever reason, then they've guaranteed that permanent position will be funded out of school funds. So they're reluctant to take that on. I've spoken about this to the department and the minister explicitly, that we actually need to encourage principals where they've got that flexible funding to use it to create those ASIP positions for a couple of reasons. One is because if I'm only creating temporary positions, I'm probably drawing on my local casuals. And then when I've got those 20 unfilled vacancies that I'm trying to fill, I've got all my casuals sitting in those temporary positions, so I've got no casuals, and now I'm trying to do things like increase my class sizes so I can reduce the number of teachers I need. I might be cutting elective choices. I might be taking away some of the allowances that I've given to my staff to enable them to do particular projects. So let's make it really clear and easy for principals to understand how they can create those positions and encourage them to do so. The other thing that we've proposed to the department as well, it's actually in our staffing position paper, which I have got multiple copies here if they're just sitting here. I'm happy to make those available for you, is that we'd propose to the department that where a school has got a well-established and stable equity loading, where we've now got several years of history about how that funding's been used, why not give the principal the right to say, you know what, I'd like to have 50% or up to 50%, right? It could be any figure, but here's a figure where we're going to allow you, Mr. or Mrs. Principal, to convert that funding to permanent positions, because we know that you're always going to have an element of that funding. Keep some of it for flexible funding. It might be for non-teaching staff, it might be for resources, it might be for site licences for programs that we're using to support our literacy and numeracy programs, for example. But this element, I know that I'm always going to spend on staffing. Give it to me as permanent staffing, because then the department has an onus to provide that staffing for me, as opposed to me having to find that from my local pool of casual teachers.
It's also been suggested that one of the drivers of the rise in insecure employment is principals using that as a device to effectively avoid having appointments via the central list. Do you think that, would you offer some comments about whether that's a genuine phenomena?
I'd reject that out of hand. The experience from my own experience from the schools I've worked at, colleague principals I've spoken to and worked with really closely, most principals that I know say, give me central staffing, I'm fed up of convening merit panels. Some colleagues have reported having to convene up to 15, 17 merit processes a year because central staff, HR cannot provide them. Every one of those panels requires a minimum of 4 people. You've got your convener, your parent rep, your AECG rep if you've got Aboriginal community, your staff rep. Depending on the level of the position, there might be additional people on top of that as well. And that's a significant impost on the school and on the principal who's convening that. Most colleagues would say, give me the staffing, let me choose those key positions which I think really are critical that I need to advertise for because it's such a specific role. My executive, absolutely, I want to choose, but no, that's simply, if it's the case, we'll be isolated.
Right, so the local selection process, it would be your evidence actually contributes to principal workload?
Absolutely, absolutely. The process itself can take up to 6 weeks. And at each stage in the process, so the convening of the panel, the writing of the ad, the shortlisting, the interviewing, the referee checks, you can be looking easily at several days for each. Shortlisting takes a day, interviewing takes a day. The process is onerous. It can be really positive, particularly if you get a good field of high quality applicants. It can also be an absolute frustration because if you're only getting 1 or 2 or no applicants, and then you're having to reconvene that panel multiple times, it just ties up time that you cannot get back.
That's for permanent appointments, but for temporary appointments there's no onerous process, is there?
No, temporary appointments are much easier, but again, the principals will use that because they're concerned about creating permanent positions because of the funding implications. It may also be because they have a short-term project that they know is only going to be a short-term project. So I don't want a permanent position there because at the end of that project, that person won't have a job. I can make that clear to the temporary teacher. But the process of appointing a temporary teacher is much easier, but in terms of your permanent staffing, principals would much prefer for HR to be meeting that obligation to provide that statewide system of employment.
Ms Abigail Boyd.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms Peterson, for your attendance. I just wanted to ask you first, this kind of what I would call an obsession of the government with short-term fixes for things. The idea of a 1-year master's program in order to try and increase the number of new teachers coming into schools. What's your view on that idea?
I canvassed colleagues across the SPC executive about this in term 4 and I got a mixed response. Some people said, well, look, 1 year dip ed worked fine in the past, we've got such a shortage, we need to get people in. Sometimes the master's program doesn't do much other than give some beginning teachers a greater sense of their own importance. My view, and the view that I've articulated on behalf of the SPC, is that I find it ironic that at a time when we're as a national level, we're saying we need to increase the status of the profession, that we're willing to undermine the academic rigour of the qualifications we require. The complexity of teaching now, compared to 5 or 6, 10, 20 years ago, is so significant. It is not enough to be a subject matter expert in maths or science or English for that matter. You have to know how to convert that knowledge into a teaching program. You need to know how to convert that into a program that's appropriate for Year 7 students, for your HSC students, for the bottom Year 9 class that are really struggling to engage, for our large numbers of non-English speaking background students, our Aboriginal students, our kids with disabilities. If you don't understand pedagogy, if you don't have a deep understanding of childhood psychology and the way that cognitive development occurs, you're going to be really struggling. I'm concerned that the moves to reduce the 2-year degree to 1 year, I understand the drivers, I understand the barriers that creates for mid-career professionals, for example, even our initial teacher education students in terms of loss of salary. I believe we need to address those issues through other means rather than simply slash in half the length of the degree. I think we run the risk of creating a short-term fix which has long-term implications for the quality of education we're providing in schools, but also the management of staff for our leadership teams.
Thank you. Do we have data, or do you know if the department has data that sets out the kind of average class size in a secondary school? I'm particularly interested your comments in your opening statement around, the way that the sort of teacher shortages can lead to not just combination of classes, but just growing class sizes. Is there a correlation between, this sort of teacher shortage crisis and the numbers of students in each class? And do you have any sort of data that would back that up?
I wish I did have data, unfortunately I don't, and I doubt that the department would either. Even prior to the current situation, the department would not have held data around the class sizes in any particular school. Is the current shortage driving an increase in class sizes? I believe, absolutely, I believe it is. It drives it from a couple of perspectives. One is that if I can't fill the positions that I've got, I've still got to run a timetable for the beginning of the year with the teachers that I have. And so instead, the maximum class size in general in the junior school is 30, and for the senior school it's 24. There are some variations around some of our practical subjects, and in the senior school there are some instances, for example, in hospitality or in some of our vocational education courses where the workspace itself may mean that even though technically the class size is 24, I can only physically get 18 into this space and meet the requirements of that course. So what principals are doing at the moment, and this has been reported to me for over the last 12, 18 months now, is that because I've got those unfilled vacancies, I'm really having to strip back two things. One is, as I mentioned before, the allowances that I'm providing to teachers to run programs. So, for example, the timetable. Timetabling has been mentioned a number of times today. You normally don't expect someone to run a timetable and do their full teaching or administrative workload as well. You'd give them a period allowance. People are stripping back those allowances that would previously have supported programs like your timetable, like your school musical, like your sports coordinator, and in some cases, like your literacy or numeracy, small group withdrawals, or your HSC tutorial programs, because to get people to do that, I need to give them time. If I don't have, and then I need to backfill the teaching that they would have normally done on their regular load. If I've got no one to backfill that load, I can't release that teacher for that program. So that's one impact. The other one is that technically I might have enough students to only run 4 classes in year 8, but because of the staffing pressure, you know what, I can maximise the class sizes, I can get by, and I can get by with only running 3. So technically I'm not breaking anything, I'm not asking a teacher to work above load, but what I am doing is making their job as a classroom teacher and a classroom manager much more difficult because they've now got less time to spend with each of the students in their class.
So then it's cyclical, because then you get increasing burnout, you get people leaving the profession, and then you've got even fewer teachers for the next year. So I guess it's that, it's a bit of a spiral, this crisis.
It absolutely is, and the other thing the other place where it impacts as well is on subject choice, and I made a reference to this earlier on as well. So we know that we have some schools, particularly in regional areas, but not only in regional areas, where they have not run metalwork for 9 years because they just don't have a metalwork teacher. And so that's an example. I was reading through some material that I prepared earlier on. But what happens then is, instead of creating a curriculum pattern that meets the needs of students, we're now focusing more importantly on what are the teachers that we've got, and we'll run that program. If you've got a student, a son or a daughter, if you've got a child who's really passionate about doing a particular subject and they can't do it at their local school, then a parent will often make a choice about where to send that child where they can access that education. And you get a rather ironic, and again it's a cyclic effect where we privilege our HSC courses. So if I've got an industrial arts teacher, I'll put them on the HSC class, but if their full load is taken up teaching 2 or 3 HSC courses and Year 11 courses, I can't give them a junior class, and instead I'm covering that junior class with, a really keen, enthusiastic professional teacher, but they're not a trained expert in that area. The likelihood that those children are going to choose that subject for the HSC diminishes as well. And so it creates this never-ending spiral where not only are we not necessarily meeting the potential for all our students in terms of their academic achievement, we're in some cases losing our students to other schools because they can offer the courses that we can't.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so one last question from Aileen.
Sorry. Thanks, Mr. Peterson. And I have to apologise because it's been 10 years since my youngest finished school, and from a regional area. And I was just wondered, because of your involvement with the secondary principal and being in a regional area. So as an example, this is just humour me as an idea, rather than competing with other schools, in Armidale, the 3 sort of non-government schools collaborated. So when they put out, the subject choices for Year 11 and 12, knowing that they couldn't fulfil, like each school couldn't offer those subjects, but the schools collaborated. So, and obviously with distance, they were, PLC students were ended up going to TAS and a few. Is there an opportunity, like, I don't know if you could do this in Sydney, but whether, and I know schools are competitive, and yes, they still remain competitive in sports, music Eisteddfods, debates and things like that, but there was that friendly rivalry because they had that relationship because they were in the classroom. Is there a way that could be offered? So if you've got a teacher that specialises in a subject at that school and someone else, and then there's enough students within that cluster that they could still, I don't know, I'm just putting an idea out there. No, and because you're in the principal secondaries, maybe you can have a discussion and say, is this something that we can do?
Absolutely it is, and it is happening, and it has been happening for quite some time. I'll give you, I know we're short of time, but a couple of quick examples. Going back probably 13, 14 years in Orange, there was the E2 collaboration between Orange High School, Canopolis Rural Technology High, Blaney High and Mullong Central School. It was around stage 6, and it was around ensuring that students of both of the large schools in Orange had equitable access to curriculum, but also bringing in those smaller centres of Blaney and Mullong. In Bathurst at Denison College, we share our stage 6. In fact, we're now up with always shared our stage 6 curriculum. So across both campuses we run shared courses. We offer in excess of 90 subjects for the HSC. They don't all necessarily get up. It depends on student choice and staffing. We've expanded that into stage 5, so years 9 and 10 can now access that shared curriculum as of last year, I believe. So there are a couple of examples straight up. There are other places, often happens in regional areas. Yeah, I'm also aware of some metropolitan areas where it happens as well. So, yep, we are proud of our own school. There is a degree of healthy competition, but above all, one of the things that I promote with colleagues, and we believe strongly in, is we want to have the strongest possible system of public education in New South Wales, and that means 2,200 schools, 500 secondary schools collaborating and building each other up and maximising those things. At the moment in the Bathurst network, the 2 campuses of the college, but also places like Oberon High School and Blaney High School are having a look in particularly around the TAS area, around how we can work as a consortium to make sure that students aren't missing out, because even in the larger campuses in Bathurst, Kelso and Bathurst High, we are struggling to get some of those specialist teachers in the TAS areas.
Thanks very much, and our time has expired, unfortunately, so thanks Mr Peterson for your time and contribution, which has been very valuable to the committee. Thank you. And hearing is closed at that point. Thank you.